Regular meeting of the San Marcos City Council to order. Today is Monday, October 2nd. We're meeting on Monday due to National Night Out tomorrow. Time is 6 o'clock. Ms. Trevino, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Prather, Mr. Scott.
Here.
Mr. Gleason.
Here.
Mayor Houston,
Here.
Ms. Garza,
Here.
Mr. Gonzalez,
Here.
and Mr. Mendoza.
Here.
We have a quorum present.
Okay, our invocation this evening is being given by Mike Hollifield, who is a chaplain with the San Marcos Police Department. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. If it be appropriate, please bow your head. Lord, we give you thanks for the freedom we have to be here tonight. We are blessed to live in San Marcos. We pray for your continued blessings and protection over our city and all who lives here. Thank you, Lord, for our mayor, our city council, our city manager, our city leaders and staff. Thank you for their hard work and dedication and sacrifice. May they stay true to the mission before them. May they never neglect or abuse their authority, but that they would stand firm for truth and justice. May you continually bless them, their families, and their homes abundantly. We pray for this council meeting tonight. Give the council members wisdom and guidance as they deliberate on the items before them. Give each of them a sense of welfare and true needs for our people of San Marcos. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. Council, next is our pledges of allegiance to the United States and Texas. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Next on our program is our citizen comment period. The City Council welcomes speakers at work sessions and regular meetings. Persons wishing to speak during this portion of our program, citizen comment or Q&A. To speak in person or online, you may sign up online at sanmarcostx.gov, click Government, City Council, Citizen Comment, or you may sign up in person at the City Clerk's office. Either way, the deadline is 5:45 the day of the meeting. If you want to speak online, you can sign up online. Let us know you want to speak online, and that is prior to noon is the deadline because we're going to provide a call-in number and a link. Speakers may speak once during the time period and may not yield time to others. If you speak at citizen comment about a public hearing topic, we ask that you not repeat exactly the same comments again during the public hearing on the same topic. You will have 3 minutes to speak, which starts when you state your name. A timer is displayed on the screen. You start in the green and the countdown begins. When you have 20 seconds left, the timer will be in the yellow section, and when the timer is red, your time to speak is up, and there is a bell that will automatically ring when your time is up. The mayor and council will endeavor to ensure that meetings are conducted in a courteous manner and in an atmosphere free of defamation, intimidation, personal insults, profanity, or threats of violence. And I will read through the list. This is the order. Will be Kama Davis, Emily Langley, Isla Reese, Jillian Garza, Shannon Mattingly, Matt Kenyon, Billy Ray Callahan, Lisa Marie Capoletta, and Ryan Patrick Perkins. So, Kama Davis, you are first, and the clock will start when you state your name.
Are you all able to hear me okay? Not too loud? Okay. My name is Kama Davis. I live at 1312 Perkins Street. To City Council and the Mayor of San Marcos, thank you for all you do for this town. I'm going to speak first about agenda items 20 and 21. A large developer named SM21 Block LLC is suing the city for title to a little alleyway near Moon Street. I'm not sure of the process or City Council's role in this litigation, but I am hoping that the city, if you have any influence on whether to mediate, settle, or allow the developer to take title of the Moon Street alleyway, I hope that you will please keep it for San Marcos. This might seem small and innocuous, a little alleyway. In reality, it is very important and could be the first step in a large, long-term, possibly destructive development along the river. To get an idea of where this block and alleyway is, I included a picture in your packet. It is right across the river from where Lions Club is, and it's right next to, or right down the street from the Red Theater building on campus. And it buttresses up against the parking lot where the colloquium is. So just to give you a little idea. The company who is suing San Marcos has designs on massive construction and large developments, not only on this block, but all of the land behind it and to the side of it. The way I know that is because I've seen the developers' renditions online. I think there's a link in the email I sent you also to see that. As we heard in the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting last week, some developers would like to build all the way down North CM Allen, about where this block starts that's looking at the alleyway. The developments would cross Hopkins, they would go past Rio Vista and the park, into all the neighborhoods there, and all the way down to the highway. Again, the company SM Block 21 has its architectural renditions online. This same developer who is suing San Marcos could soon be asking for permits and rezoning to develop. This type of development might be appropriate for other places in San Marcos, but not right here, not right by the river. Again, I encourage the city to please talk to the legal team, and if you have any ability, make sure that we do not mediate, settle, or allow the developer to take the alleyway on Moon Street. On agenda item 9, please vote no and do not amend the Land Development Code to allow the conditional use permit renewal process to become an administrative process. Please leave the CUP renewal process in the hands of public officials who are beholden to the citizens of San Marcos. Currently, let's say that the city grants a conditional use permit for alcohol sales to a restaurant near a neighborhood. Part of the condition is that the restaurant keeps noise down. If the restaurant does not keep the noise down, currently our city officials can deny renewing the CUP. Neighbors who are disturbed by the restaurant's noise can weigh in and request that their public officials not renew the conditional use permit. If the renewal process is turned into an administrative process, citizens lose their voices. Again, please vote against making the renewal of conditional use permits administrative and keep the decision in the hands of public officials. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Emily Langley.
Right. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. My name is Emily Langley. I am a current student here at Texas State University, and I am the Vice President of a new community organization called the Tenants Advocacy Group, or TAG as we like to go by. Later this evening for agenda item number 17, you'll be hearing a staff presentation regarding PSA 2302. The discussion will be over whether to amend the preferred scenario from existing neighborhood to high intensity in order to build a 7-story, 918-bedroom, rent-by-the-bed student housing apartment complex. They're on the south corners of Lindsay and North Street, which is about a block from Joe's Cafe, if you're familiar. I'm here today to tell you that as a student, a community member, and a representative of TAG, I do not want another student housing complex. And please don't just take my word for it. We currently have petitions with over 200 signatures. To put that in perspective, last Tuesday, we had 40. So that means within the week, we have gathered so much more support as word's getting out about this new application. Furthermore, we already have enough student housing complexes. There are currently 48 with about 6,000 beds that are within walking distance of campus. This can all be confirmed on the multifamily status reports on the city's website, and this doesn't even take into consideration the traditional housing that we have, like regular apartments that rent by the unit, and houses that can be rented, and homes to be owned. So we are already overbuilt, and we do not need any more. In these student housing apartments, tenants are made to sign very predatory contracts that don't provide any room for mitigation or relief of student issues. The developers do not care about what students want as much as they can, claim to. They're all in it for the money, and we are the ones who have to actually live in these conditions. You'll hear some experiences from us personally a little later on in citizens' comment. Just to reiterate, We don't want any more of these. Please be in opposition of amending the preferred scenario map. Even if this one development application gets put down, if the scenario map is amended, a developer's gonna come back every single year and just keep trying and trying until there's a high rise right next to a neighborhood where people live, and students are just gonna get thrown back into the same cycle that we're living in now. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Isla Ruiz. Is Isla Ruiz here?
Yes, can you hear
Oh,
me?
she's remote, I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Isla Reese. I'm Social Media Manager of Tenants Advocacy Group, also known as TAG, and a recent Texas State alumni. I have lived in student housing for the past couple of years, and I'm going to share a few personal experiences from our TAG members while living in the rent-by-the-bed housing model. In 2018, there was a deadly fire in a local apartment complex that cost multiple people their lives. A year later, an 18-year-old college freshman moved into the same complex, completely uninformed about this tragedy. She would not find out about this event until other residents and community members informed her. To be clear, the complex themselves were deliberately silent about this history. Her unit suffered from the same structural damage and neglect that ultimately caused the fires, and this was an issue she contended with over her entire lease. In 2022, another student signed a lease with a different local complex. She finds there is mold in her unit, and as any other tenant would do, she informs her maintenance of the issue with the expectation they will care about her basic quality of living, but nothing is done. She reaches out multiple times, writes many formal letters, and is ultimately informed that the property manager refuses to repair such issues. To be clear, the apartment complex is telling a tenant it is not their job to provide a livable space to their residents. Ultimately, the student was forced to pursue legal action, the only action that resulted in her apartment complex taking responsibility for their end of the contract. Why do apartment complexes feel comfortable putting students in these positions? And why do they feel emboldened to these levels of neglect, to not only to their residents, but the law itself? And finally, in 2021, I signed a local apartment complex. In my 2 years at this complex, I've received multiple unwarranted or mistaken fees in my account with little to no explanation. Upon moving out, me and my roommates were given disproportionate charges for damage to our unit, and as per Texas property code, did not exceed normal wear and tear. We were one of the many units that were given these type of charges. But why do apartment complexes feel comfortable offloading the cost of basic unit maintenance onto students in violation of the law? On behalf of Tenants Advocacy Group, we appreciate you listening to us this evening. And upon hearing presentation of Agenda Item 17, we encourage you to remember our stories, prevent future complexes from being built on existing neighborhoods. We cannot let developers speak for us when they are not in our shoes and seem to exploit our inexperience whenever possible. There needs to be more protection for tenants and other residents living in these areas. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jillian Garza.
Good evening, council members. I'm Jillian Garza. I live at 222 Ramsey Street, the Campus Trailhead Apartments. I had one of the apartments that didn't open on time, and so I was homeless for over a month. And I'm here to talk about Agenda Item 17. I'm a current student at Texas State University, but I'm also a member of the Tenants Advocacy Group, also known as TAG. As Emily mentioned, student housing contracts are extremely predatory and only care about the money. They're non-negotiable and have terms that force students to conform with the model for signing for an individual bedroom and not the unit. For example, let's say I sign a contract and I immediately become liable for the entire year's sum of the contract, meaning if my monthly payment is $800 per month for a single bedroom, the yearly contract is for $9,600. And I owe that money immediately, although management splits up the payment over the course of 12 months. Whereas in standard housing, I actually pay rent by the month for the term of the lease. Some standard contracts also contain a buyout clause, which usually allows tenants to pay 1.5 to 2 months of rent to move out early. However, these clauses aren't available in student housing contracts. And if a tenant needs to move out early, they must pay the entire remaining sum of their contract. And this often keeps students from taking advantage of opportunities that require them to leave the area or adds more complexity and stress to a student if an emergency occurs that forces them to leave. And so now, let's say I sign this rent by the bedroom contract though, and am moving into my unit. I notice that there's barely or non-functioning fixtures, the damaged furniture, and just dirty rooms in general. But there's nothing I can do about that because I signed a contract with an as-is clause. And this means that I had no right to see the unit I'd be living in or meet the roommates the apartment matched me with. And all I got to see was a model unit that is purposely polished and has never been lived in. This is incredibly misleading and forces students into poor living conditions. And so now, after I've signed this rent by the bedroom contract, I'm essentially stuck. Since rent by the bedroom apartments do roommate matching, there's a possibility that I can be moved away from the roommates I chose. Or I can be matched with anyone the complex chooses. The landlords do not have to match me with a student roommate. Rent by the beds are advertised as student housing, and my contract title is student housing contract, yet I may be matched with a non-student family. And some of these student housing contracts say that the apartment complex can move a random person into my bedroom at any time without my consent, not just my unit, but my individual and personal private bedroom. And again, these terms are non-negotiable. There's nothing I can do about it. And so there's truly no security for students. And this all may seem outlandish or extreme, but it's an unfortunate and insane truth that students are living with every single day. Students are tired of this forced standard. We don't want this anymore, so please stop allowing student complexes to be built. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Shannon Mattingly.
Good evening, Shannon Mattingly. I am representing the developer. I'm with the Drenner Group, 2705 Bee Cave Road in Austin, Texas. And I'm here to speak on agenda item number 17, which is going through the first phase of the process for an amendment to the preferred scenario map. And currently, there are 6 parcels that are part of this project that are coming forward. 3 of those already have the correct preferred scenario, the other 3 do not. And so the 3 that are on North and Lindsay are coming forward with a request for high intensity. The current code comprehensive plan from 2013 identifies them as existing neighborhood. However, the draft plan that is coming before council now and that council will soon be voting on actually shows those properties as medium neighborhood intensity. And so the way the comprehensive plan is laid out in the draft plan is that you have mixed use on the first 3 parcels, and then as you cross North Street, the other 3 parcels are medium intensity neighborhood, and then there's a high intensity neighborhood next to that, and then it goes back to medium. And so our request is to look at high intensity because that's under the existing comprehensive plan that we have now. And then as we move forward, depending on which one gets through the process first, we'll determine kind of how that compatibility changes as the new comprehensive plan is adopted and that new map is adopted, and whether we would shift that. I know staff will work on how that comparison works as we go forward. The property is currently zoned multifamily. There is a variation from MF 12, 18, and 24. So all of those have zoning classifications that allow for multifamily development. The staff will give you a presentation later tonight and kind of tell you a little bit more about where we are at in the process. But tonight's a preferred scenario communication. It will go back to Planning Commission. And when it goes back to Planning Commission, it comes back with all of the requests. So there are 4 applications. The first one is the preferred scenario amendment. Then there is a rezoning to make all of that multifamily zone property rezoned to CD5. The third request is to do the purpose-built student housing CUP, and then there is an alternative compliance associated with that that would go from 5 to 7 stories. And so those are what will be coming back before you in October and November, and then depending on how it goes forward into December. As most of you know, Texas State is growing. The population, student population, has gone up about 30% over the last 5 years. The applicant did hire a consulting firm to go out and look at what properties that are student housing in the 1 mile radius of this site, what their occupancies are, what their parking looks like, how many units they have, how many parking spaces they have, and how much of that is used.
Your time is up.
So.
Next is Matt Kenyon.
Good evening. My name's Matthew Kenyon, and I'm here in support of Agenda Item 17. I'm both the developer and the landowner on the property, and I won't repeat everything that Shannon just said, but I will be here this evening during the presentation to answer any questions. So, thank you.
Okay, next is Billy Ray Callahan.
Hello, my name is Billy Ray Callahan, and this letter is to the following personnel. Number 1, Jane Houston, Mayor. Number 2, Amanda Hernandez, Planning and Development Services Director. Number 3, Jamie Lee Chase, Parks and Recreation Director. Number 4, Allison Brake, Historical Preservation Officer. Number 5, Carol Griffith, Housing Rehabilitation and Repair Programming. Number 6, Mike Wills, Contractor for Jackson Chapel United Methodist Church. And the following buildings that are scheduled for restoration is number 1, the Home Economic Building at Dunbar, which is adjacent to Dunbar Recreation Center. Number 2, my house at 740 Center Street. Number 3, my church, Jackson Chapel United Methodist Church, located on Center Street. Number 4, the old First Baptist Church that is riding away on MLK and Comanche Street. And finally, number 5, my request for an additional name to be added to the Charles S. Cox William Doc Bullison House. And I am available for questioning at the end of this meeting. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lisa Marie Capoletta. She is joining us online. There
Good
she
evening.
is.
My name is Professor Lisa Marie Capoletta. They call me LMC. For item 9, over the last 7 years, the goal of the dais has been to increase property ownership and as opposed to increase renter properties. Roland Saucedo reached out to me this afternoon. He cannot make it tonight to speak, and he wanted to weigh in on his concerns. Changing it from occupancy to 2 to 3 in terms of your ordinance. Ordinance will result in developers purchasing single-family homes. It will also increase rent to college students. You will never get to your goal over the last several years to increase property ownership. Additionally, we will fear of gentrification for us, the neighbors. The neighbors will get taxed out of their homes, and it's not affordable housing for students. The current rate by the bedroom upwards right now per room is $650 to $1,200 per room. And as far as the right of the municipality in terms of the state legislation of 2023, it's on appeal for being unconstitutional. Regarding item number 17 in your packet, I'm finding it very interesting that the comments from the students as well as the residents from our community are not included in your packet, nor is the where they write up what happened at the meeting, and that is very concerning. The city staff should have been more transparent when working on the comprehensive plan. Shannon is telling you that there are 6 parcels. City staff never told us this. In fact, the comprehensive plan committee, we are shocked. We told them we wanted buffers. We told them that we did not want transition zones. We also told city staff that we do not want tools for transition zones, and I believe this is an abusive relationship now between city staff and the citizens, and that's why people like me get upset, because we trusted the city staff. In fact, the ink is not even dry in the comprehensive master plan, and here we are with Shannon and her running buddy. Out of the gate, they are not being a good neighbor. There was lack of transparency, communication, collegiality when it came to the neighborhood meeting. The developer is citing occupancy data by going door to door, and yet he did no outreach when it came to having the neighbors come to his meeting, whether it was door to door or social media. Additionally, the location for the neighborhood meeting was difficult to find, and it was not ADA compliant. There was no signage for people to find the meeting. You had a city staff member there to take a tally, but she couldn't just simply help people find the location. Additionally, the comprehensive plan This is a situation of a fire hazard. Worst case scenario, if a fire breaks out in that area, there is no buffer, and many of those structures of the project are wooden framed structures. How will first responders navigate this? Many of us also have concerns about stormwater drainage, this being another scenario for the woods on my side of town. The traffic is atrocious, and if you have watched the videos that I have posted, you could hear the utter, it's overwhelming, the noise of the traffic that is happening. We are afraid of gentrification, and I find it very ironic that the ink is barely dry on the comprehensive plan, and here we are. Now, I'm noticing you gave Shannon a little bit extra time on that bell. Thank you for your time, and God bless San Marcos.
The bell is automatic, so I'm not sure what's going on with the bell. Our last speaker is Ryan Patrick Perkins.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Ryan Patrick Perkins, 727 West Hopkins Street. First, item 9, this is the adoption of the code amendment changes. I want to thank you for passing unanimously the first round of code changes. You are getting ready tonight, if you vote in favor of the code changes, to make the most significant public policy advancement in historic preservation for the city of San Marcos in a generation that will have generations of impact with your actions here tonight in protecting the city's cultural heritage. So thank you very much for your work, and thank you to the city staff and to the members of the HPC who worked in 2021 to bring you those recommended changes. I'm here tonight because I'm deeply troubled by item number 17. Reclassify the North Street student housing area from existing neighborhood to high intensity. I wish to draw your attention to the invaluable insights provided by the My Historic SMTX City of San Marcos Historic Preservation Resources Survey, a meticulously researched and documented document adopted by the City Council in 2019 that should serve as our guiding light in this crucial and decision-making process. Ms. Mattingly was the planning director at the time that document was adopted by the City Council and the HPC and the Planning and Zoning Commission unanimously in all three bodies. Section 7B2 of the report outlines the potential expansion of the existing Lindsay Rogers Local Historic District, an area that exemplifies the essence of our city's architectural and cultural heritage. This proposed expansion area with the Craftsman bungalows, minimal traditional and Queen Anne style houses, along with the Gothic Revival influenced First Presbyterian Church on the corner of West Hutchison, represents a unique and irreplaceable tapestry of our past. The report makes it abundantly clear that these structures are not just relics of a bygone era, but living artifacts to contribute significantly to our city's identity. They are a testament to our architectural evolution and the historical context within which San Marcos developed. This is the original part of San Marcos, the old town San Marcos that we're talking about. The evolution of these resources, both high and medium preservation priority, underscores the importance of the larger historical narrative of our community. Approving the proposed amendment would not just be a departure from the commitment to preserving our heritage, which you've all made at the last meeting and you're going to make again tonight, walk the walk, talk the talk. It would be a disavowal of our responsibility to future generations if you approve this. The proposed amendment risks irreparably damaging the integrity of that neighborhood that encapsulates the very spirit of San Marcos. It would send a message to short-term gains hold more value than the preservation of our cultural legacy. I ask for you to vote against the proposed amendment.
And that concludes the citizen comment portion of our program. Next, we have 3 presentations. Ms. Trevino, tell us about the first one, please.
Yes, receive a presentation from Deloitte & Touche LLP on the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery, CDBG-DR, Quarterly Internal Audit Report, and provide direction to staff.
Okay. Mr. Locke?
Probably aware, the city received $34 million in Community Development Block Grant Disaster Relief Funding in response to the 2015 flooding events. One of the requirements of receiving that funding is that internal audit and review be performed. The city contracted with Deloitte to perform this audit and review, and Kathy Schwartfeger is on the line with us today to provide an overview of the results of the second quarter audit and review.
There she is.
Yep, I'm here. Hello, City Council. Thank you for allowing us to present this evening. My name is Kathy Schwartfeger. I'm a senior partner at Deloitte. Today, I'll be sharing with you the results of our our January 1st, 2023 through March 31st, 2023 quarter two activities. As in prior reports, each quarter, we're required by federal statutes to look at the design and operating effectiveness of the internal controls of the finance and purchasing departments over the community development block grant for disaster recovery funds. We also look at compliance with federal program grant rules and regulations, as well as looking at compliance with overall city policies and procedures related to these programs. Lastly, we look at the compliance with the HUD action plan and the city's adherence to the action plan, and we follow up on any prior year findings, either by HUD or prior auditors. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Carlos Diaz, who will go through the results for this quarter.
Hi, good evening, Mayor Houston, City Council. I hope everybody's doing excellent today. Gonna keep it brief and short and to the point. So basically, it was a really interesting quarter, this one. Interesting in the way that everything was accounted for, it was set. We did a thorough review of the city's expenditures for the quarter two of the fiscal year 2023. We evaluated everything between April 1st, 2023 until the end of June, and we reviewed the city's expenditures. We selected 30% of the expenditures and ran it by the general ledger. We did a verification of the city's approval and purchasing procedures. We went into the procurement and contract documentation. We verified for any change orders or any new amendments on any contracts, and verified that everything was consistent to the program from the CDBG-DR. We also issued interviews on key stakeholders to the city. And basically from this quarter, no news is good news. We had an excellent quarter. There were no findings or observations from our review this time. So I'm going to give the city staff, everybody, a huge congratulations. It's the first time since we're doing this that we get this result. So I'm really excited that to be part of a group that, when I see that the city is doing their job really well and keeping transparency. So I would like to congratulate all of you. If any of you have any questions, feel free to ask. We're here to provide them for you.
If no questions, we'll hand it back to Mr. Locke.
Hold on. I can get unmuted here. Are there questions from the council? Okay. It appears there are not, so we'll go back to you, Mr. Locke, I guess.
Always a pleasure talking to you. Have a great night.
Thank you. Good to see y'all.
Thank you.
That concludes this one. So we will move on to item 2. Ms. Trevino?
Receive a staff presentation of the quarter end June 30, 2023 financial report and provide direction to the city manager.
Mr. Locke.
Thank you again, Mayor and City Council. This provides an overview of the quarterly financial activity through June 30th, 2023. This report was shared with the Finance and Audit Committee at the August 22nd Finance and Audit Committee meeting. We'll go over the major operating funds, including the general fund, our 5 enterprise funds, and the hotel tax fund. Next slide, please. We begin by looking at the general fund, and just to provide an overview of the layout of the slide, the green colors are revenues, and the solid and the blue color expenses. The solid color is the actual activity for the quarter, or the year-to-date activity, I should say. And the striped color is the budget for either the revenue or the expense. Beginning with the, if you look on the left-hand side, that's the 2023 year-to-date activity, and on the right-hand side is the 2022 year-to-date activity for comparison. There's also a chart to the right of the graph that includes the same information. Just taking a look at where we're at as of June 30th, with revenues, we've collected 84% of our total revenue budget. That's $82 million of our $98 million budget. That is in line with where we would think we would be at this point of the year. As a general target, being at this point of the year, you would be about 75% of the way through the revenue expense budget. There are some cyclical things that you have to take into consideration, and in the general fund, we receive our property tax, most of the property tax through the month of January. Property tax make up 30% of our budget, so that's why we collect such a high amount of our general fund revenue earlier in the year. On the expense side, we've spent 63% of our budget, or $69 million of the $110 million budget. When you compare that to where we were last year, it's pretty comparable from a percent perspective. And there's a couple slides following that provide a little bit more detail for both the revenues and the expenses of the general fund. Next slide, please. This slide provides some more detail on the general fund revenues by major category. The largest revenue source is sales tax. And you can see the 2023 revised budget is just over $40 million, and we've collected $29.4 million of that amount. When you compare that to where we were at this point last year, we've collected $2.2 million more in sales tax revenue, which is an 8% growth. Just to provide some more recent information, through August, which is the 11th month in the fiscal year, we have collected $2.8 million in sales tax revenue, which is also just over 8% year-over-year growth when you compare it to where we were at that point last year. We budget 98% of our property tax revenue, and as you can see, we've collected all of the property tax revenue that we've budgeted. Those are two major revenue sources in the general fund. I just also wanted to point out the interest income. A little later, I will have an update on the investment report, and you'll see the extreme growth that we've seen just with the federal funds rate increasing, which increases the returns that we get on the types of investments we can invest in. So we budgeted $190,000, and we've received $1.4 million in interest revenue through June of this year. Next slide, please. Moving on to expenditures, the personnel is the single largest expense category in the general fund. The general fund provides services, and it takes people to provide the types of services that the general fund provides. When you just look at the operating budget, personnel makes up 70% of the total general fund budget. So in total, we've spent 69% of that. When you look at where we were last year, that is slightly higher. That's partially can be attributable to starting to see a slowdown in turnover, which is good news. In total, you can see that we have spent 63% of the budget. And if we were spending it evenly, we would be through about 75%. If you look at where we were last year, we're at about 61%, so we're close to where we were at this same point last year. Next slide, please. The next five funds will go through our enterprise funds, and we begin with the electric utility fund. Beginning first with revenues, we've collected 71% of revenues, budgeted revenues through a year at about $46 million of our $65 million budget. Our largest revenue month for electric is the hotter month, so the July to September month, we tend to collect higher amount of revenue, so we're on target to hit that amount. When you look at where we were last year, we're about at that same, the same collection percentage. On the expense side, we've spent 64% of our overall budget. And one thing to keep in mind with, especially electric and water, wastewater, and stormwater on the next couple of slides, is the debt service makes up a large portion of the annual operating expenses. So you'll notice that the expenses tend to lag behind. So for electric utility, the debt service payment that will occur in August is about $4 million, makes up about 6% of the budget. So that accounts for part of the reason why you see only 64% of the way through the budget. When you look at where we were last year, it's close in terms of where we were last year, so we're on track similarly as last year. Next slide, please. Now looking at the water and wastewater utility, we've collected 73% of the budget. Typically, the warmer months are our higher revenue collection months as people tend to water their lawns more. With the water restrictions, we're not going to see that this year. So we more than likely will not hit our revenue target in the water wastewater fund this year. During the budget process, the slides, the estimates that we provided showed that we'll finish probably around $56 million, which is going to be just under $2 million short of what we budgeted. And that's largely attributable to not bringing in as much revenue from the water conservation efforts. On the expense side, we're at 48% of our budget. I mentioned the larger debt service payments. In the water wastewater fund, the August payment is $14 million, and it makes up 25% of the total budget. So that will certainly get us around that 75% mark if you were to factor that in. If you look at where we were last year, we are slightly less than where we were at this point last year, and we'll more than likely not spend as much money because of we're not going to purchase as much water. Next slide, please. Moving on to the stormwater management slide, or sorry, the stormwater management fund. We've collected 75% of the budgeted revenues in this fund, which is on target with where we're at in this point of the year, as well as where we were at this point last year. On the expense side, we have spent 42% of our budget, which is also close to where we were last year. The remaining debt service payment in the Stormwater Management Fund is $3.5 million. And with this being a smaller fund, that actually makes up about 39% of its total budget.
I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Sorry. You said that the water, we're not going to make as much, but aren't we going to take automatic, whether we use it or not, the payment's the same with GBRA?
Just not having to treat as much water. So
okay, so it's the treatment side of it? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And so just finishing off with where we were on the stormwater management is that just informing council that the remaining debt service payment is $3.5 million in the stormwater management fund. Next slide, please. Our last utility-related enterprise fund is resource recovery, and we have collected 74% of our total revenues in the resource recovery at $5 million of the $7 million budget, and we have spent 63% of our expense budget, $4.6 million of $7.3 million budget. When you look at where we were last year, we are close to where we are last year, and we think we're going to finish on target in this fund. And the final enterprise fund is the airport fund. We have collected 72% of our revenues, $551,000 of $767,000 budget, and we've spent 70% of our total expense budget at $539,000 of $765,000. Revenues are pretty much on target of where we were, where we think we would be. When you compare expenses to last year, we are a little ahead. This is a smaller fund, and this year there was a capital a capital outlay request for utility task vehicle of $20,000 and associated equipment. So just adding that $20,000 increased the percent that much. And the last fund that we'll go over is the hotel tax fund. We have collected 81% of our budget so far, $3.5 million. When you look at where we were last year, from a percent perspective, we haven't collected as high, and part of that is just a change in how we're budgeting. And for the current year, we budgeted using more historical trends, still being conservative on the impact that the COVID pandemic had on the hotel and tourism industry. Prior to that, we were being overly conservative, just not knowing how things were going to pan out. So that's why you see that we had almost collected the entire budget when you look at fiscal year 2022 revenues at this point in the year. On the expense side, we have spent 46% of the budget, which is lower than where we were last year as well. There were two big projects that haven't had a lot of expenses within the hotel tax fund. The wayfinding project, as of June, only $11,000 of a $500,000 budget had been spent. And then the conference center parking lot improvements, as of June, only $300,000 of $640,000 budget had been spent. And that concludes the financial overview. Be happy to address any questions council may have.
Council, any questions? It's all clearly laid out, and it was in our packets, and we've had time to study it, so thank you. Are you ready to go on to the next one?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Ms. Trevino.
Receive a staff presentation of the quarter end June 30, 2023 investment report and provide direction to the city manager.
Thank you again, Mayor and Council. This is the final presentation, and it's a quarterly investment report. This investment report was also shared with the Finance and Audit Committee at the August 22nd meeting. We'll begin with an overview of the economy as it impacts our investments. When we look at what the Federal Reserve has done, this was as of June. The Federal Reserve increased rates 0.25% to a target range of 5 to 5.25%. Since June, at the July meeting, the Federal Reserve increased another 0.25%. So right now, it's sitting at the 5.25 to 5.5% range. In September, the Federal Reserve did not make a change, so we're still at that 5.25 to 5.5% range. And this has a direct impact on the federal securities and the type of securities the city can invest in. As we have discussed, the Federal Reserve Committee is trying to reduce inflation to a rate of about 2% over time. Inflation in June, as of this report being released, was 3%, looking at the Consumer Price Index. Looking more recently in August, it was 3.7%. When you subtract food and energy out, which is volatile, and it tends to be what the Federal Reserve follows more, in June it was 4.8%, and in August it was 4.3%. So that measure has decreased for 5 consecutive months. Looking at unemployment as of June, San Marcos was right in the middle. As you can see, Texas had an unemployment rate of 4.2%. The U.S. nationwide was at 3.8%, and San Marcos was at 4%. Next slide, please. This slide provides an overview of the city's portfolio. It compares where we finished in March 31st to where we were as of June 30th. And so you can see altogether the total portfolio went from $366 million to $364 million, a slight decrease. That is somewhat common. When you look at us collecting all of the property taxes up front and then we spend those down to support operations through the remainder of the fiscal year, you will see some spend down of the total portfolio. And the only significant changes to look at in the different asset types of the portfolio is you'll see a decrease in the pools and money market account, as well as a small decrease in demand account and an increase in securities. And this is just shifting money into those higher yielding investments as to make sure that the city is getting the largest return on investment that it can. We finished the quarter with a total portfolio yield of 3%. And when you look at what the rolling 12-month yield was, it's 2.5%. So we are starting to see an uptick in the yield that the city's getting on its money. The third quarter total interest earnings across all the portfolio was $3.4 million, and year to date it was $8 million. So when you look at where we were at this point last year, we're at $480,000. So when you compare, that's just the difference that in investment returns that we're seeing now that the federal funds rate has increased to 5%. Next slide, please. This slide shows the different investment values by fund type. On the left-hand side, we have what we call the consolidated funds. That is all of the funds with the exception of the enterprise funds. And on the right-hand side are the enterprise funds that we just covered in the financial overview. So when looking at on the left-hand side, you can see that when compared to where we were as of March 31st, the total portfolio decreased from 151 million to 147 million. And again, this is spending down some of those tax revenues that have come in. When you look, you'll see a blue and a green color. The blue is the regular cash, and the green is the reserve cash. So in the general fund, there's a 25% reserve requirement. So that is the amount of money that's been set aside in the reserve. We account for the two separately. On the right-hand side, you can see a slight increase in the enterprise funds, and we also touched on that in the financial overview. And the enterprise funds tend to build up money in that fourth quarter when they make the larger debt service payments. You'll see it come down more. Next slide, please. This slide just shows, it takes the 147 million in consolidated funds and it breaks it out by fund. So it just shows how much of that 147 million belongs to each one of these different funds. The largest by far is for the general fund. You see 31.5% of that amount is 46 million belongs to the general fund. And then as you go down, you can see how much of that money belongs to each one of those funds. Next slide, please. This slide shows the same amount for the enterprise funds. We have $216 million total in enterprise portfolio funds. The largest on the enterprise side is in the capital improvement program funding. You can see the top three. By far the largest is with the water, wastewater, utility, CIP. This is going to have a lot of bond funds for the ongoing projects that are going on for water, wastewater, electric, and stormwater. Next slide, please. This is the investment diversification that is allowed by the city's investment policy that City Council approves. On the left-hand side, it has the type of security, then the allowable percent that is allowed within the investment policy, and then it compares where we were as of the second quarter to where we were in the third quarter. Just to point out some of the big changes that you'll notice. In the money market funds, you'll see that a decrease of 11% and then an increase in the federal agency coupon securities of over 12%. And again, that's just taking the money and moving it to where the higher yielding investments are. And the final slide just compares the different yields that the city tracks to our benchmark. The benchmark is the green and the pink colored, and which is the 6 month and the 1 year. So anytime the the Federal Reserve adjusts rates, those are going to jump up immediately, and the city's investments will lag behind. As we're able to invest in the higher rates, the city will start to catch up with those. The same is true when the Federal Reserve is going to reduce rates, or I should say the inverse is true. When the Federal Reserve reduces rates, you'll see those drop dramatically, and the city's investments will hold on for a longer period of time. Just a couple of things to point out on this. If you look at the purple and the yellow, that is the regular cash. At this point last year, in June of 2022, we were at 1.3% yield, and now we're at a 4% yield. And then looking at the red and the blue, at June of 2022, we were at about 30 basis points yield at this point, and now we're at about a 2% yield for those. And that concludes the presentation. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Council, any questions? Again, well done report.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Council, we are now at our consent agenda. The following ordinances, resolutions, and other items numbered 4 through 7 may be acted upon by one motion. No separate discussion or action is necessary unless desired by a council member, in which we will consider that one after our public hearing. Is there anything to pull?
Motion to approve consent.
We have a motion from Mr. Gleason, seconded by Mr. Mendoza, to approve the consent as is with nothing pulled, items 4 through 7. Are we going to vote on our push button again? All right. Oh. You want to look at my list? She needs to, her computer went south on her again. You good? Okay, we're good.
Okay. The motion passes 7-0.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we are to our public hearing, which is item 8. Ms. Trevino.
Receive a staff presentation, hold a public hearing to receive comments for or against ordinance 2023-73, amending Chapter 10 Aviation by adding a new Article 3 Airport Hazard Zoning and Surrounding Land Use Ordinance that establishes airport zoning regulations to support land use compatibility and air sports protection for the San Marcos Regional Airport, creating associated offenses and penalties, providing a savings clause, providing for the repeal of any conflicting provisions, and providing an effective date, and consider approval of ordinance 2023-73 on the first of 2 readings.
All right, Mr. Abbott. Is there a public hearing first? Yes, we do a presentation, and then we do a public hearing, then we'll do a motion, council discussion, and vote.
All right, well, good evening, council. Kirk Abbott, senior engineer with the engineering department. You know, when the British guy gets up here, there's a good chance we're talking about the airport, so I won't disappoint you this evening. So this is a public hearing to review the proposed code amendments and ordinance relating to airport zoning. And this would be to amend Chapter 10 of the Code of Ordinances, the aviation chapter. But let's quickly review a timeline. So in February of last year, we asked for council's permission to move forward with an airport zoning ordinance. Fast forward to July of this year, council appointed Planning and Zoning as the Airport Zoning Commission, which was a procedural step in getting an ordinance adopted. And more recently, September 12th, we had a public hearing at Planning and Zoning with their role as the Airport Zoning Commission. Next slide, please. Okay, let's start off with why we need an airport zoning ordinance. So firstly, the state and the federal government, the Federal Aviation Administration, are requiring municipalities to adopt an airport zoning ordinance as a requirement to continue to receive support from the FAA as part of the Airport Improvement Program. As you may know, we get federal funds from the FAA to support a large range of infrastructure projects at the airport. There are grant assurances or requirements that speak to the need for an airport zoning ordinance. One relates to hazards, the other compatible land use, and I'll just quote exactly from them with their grant assurances on compatible land use. It says, it will take appropriate action, it being the city in this case, including the adoption of zoning laws to restrict the use of land adjacent to or in the immediate vicinity of the airport to activities and purposes compatible with normal airport operations, including landing and takeoff of aircraft. Secondly, and I think no less important, is the development pressures in the region, particularly around the airport. That itself creates the need to protect the airport from hazards and neighbouring communities from the airport. Next slide, please. So those are the reasons why we need one. Now I want to remind us of the regulatory background or the state law as to where airport zoning comes from. From at the state level, there's Chapter 241 of the Texas Local Government Code, the Airport Zoning Act. This provides the framework and tools to promote a compatible airport environment. I didn't mention it here, but I will do later. There's also a federal piece of regulation regarding the height hazard zoning too. But the state law provides the ability for municipalities and counties that own an airport to regulate height hazard zoning and compatible land use zoning. Hence, these are the two main parts of the airport zoning. The purpose of the height hazard zoning is to protect the airport from developments that would cause hazards to the safe navigation of aircraft. Compatible land use zoning is to protect surrounding airport areas from the airport. In other words, to avoid having sensitive land uses within the immediate vicinity of the airport and the runways. Next slide, please. So I want to discuss a little bit on the adoption process for an airport zoning regulation. I mentioned that Council took the action to appoint Planning and Zoning as the Airport Zoning Commission, which is a procedural step. I want to add as well that the state law allows for the city to act unilaterally. This means where the zoning boundaries extend into multiple jurisdictions, which is the case with our proposed ordinance, that the city can still require that the zoning is administered across multiple jurisdictions. In fact, the state law says that a city with a population of greater than 45,000 can act unilaterally, and the neighbouring municipalities are required to observe the ordinance. The approach that we have taken is to work in cooperation with the other jurisdictions, asking them to adopt a similar ordinance, and we did meet with them last year. So that's the City of Carl, Martindale, and Hayes and Caldwell County. And we discussed their approach as how we were going to take it forward. The second half of the slide is a follow-on from my public hearing with Planning and Zoning, so it's written in the wrong tense now, but essentially the role of the Airport Zoning Commission is that they have to have a public hearing and ultimately the ones that recommend the boundaries and the regulations of that then comes to you as a governing body. And they did, we had that public meeting or hearing on September 12th, and they voted 6-1 in favour of the ordinance as it was presented. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to summarise the process that we've gone through in developing the ordinance that we have. So we use the services of our airport master plan consultant, who is familiar with the Zoning Act, the state laws. He's worked on other zoning ordinances. We've followed published guidance documentation. We've made sure we comply with the state law and other laws. We benchmarked or compared to other airports that are similar in nature in Texas. We did have a public meeting earlier this year that was well attended. We did put out a web page advertised by various means with a lot of background information to the airport zoning and what we were proposing. We allowed for comments, and some people did leave comments. Texas Aviation Partners, who operate the airport, have been fully involved in its development. The Airport Advisory Board has been presented on what's been developed and provided a resolution of support. And as I mentioned, we did have the public hearing on September 12th with Planning and Zoning. Next slide, please. Okay, one more slide on kind of the process. The code amendments or the ordinance is in your packet. There's also a report that was required per the Zoning Act that was signed by the Commission of the Chair after that public hearing. The intention would be that we add this to the aviation chapter, with chapter 10 in the Code of Ordinances, which is Article 3, a new article. And then we would later on update the Land Development Code with cross-references as necessary. Okay, next slide, please. I'll quickly go over this, but basically repeating what I said before about where we'll update this in the Code of Ordinances, but I've just listed the main sections that are in the ordinance. I'm going to focus on the two that are bolded, the main sections, the land use compatibility and the height hazard zoning part. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start in the opposite order that they were listed in that previous slide. I'm going to start with the height hazard aspect, which I think is a little bit simpler to go through. Essentially, every airport has these surfaces that are defined around them, and it's important that I stress that these are defined by the FAA. It's in the Code of Federal Regulations. We don't get to dictate them or amend them. It's just our responsibility to regulate them. So we're not going any further than what they stipulate. The only exception I would say is if our comprehensive zoning is more restrictive in some areas, then the more restrictive applies. I'll try and avoid being too much of an engineer like I was at the previous public hearing in defining in detail these surfaces, and I don't know how well you can see the exhibits. But essentially, there's about 4 or 5 different surfaces that exist around an airport. There are some that kind of just hover over the airport at a certain elevation. Then there's some that extend up and out from that one. And then you have these areas, or they're called approach zones, which extend up and out basically from the ends of the runways. So as again, these are already defined, and it's just our responsibility to regulate them. The FAA basically doesn't want anything to come close to or penetrate those surfaces that exist around an airport. So next slide, please. So how does this look for our airport? So just to describe a little bit more, one of these, I describe this as a pancake. The orange circular-ish area, that's one of those surfaces. It's called the horizontal surface, and it sits 150 feet above the elevation of the airport. It just about intersects Interstate 35 if you're going out to the northeast. Then there is the outer green pancake, which is another zone, the conical zone. I said I wasn't going to be an engineer, and now I'm getting into the details. But it extends up another 200 feet. And then you can see the orange lines. These are the approach surfaces that extend out from the runways. We have 3 runways. And then there's a surface, one of the approach zones on, I call it the diagonal runway, that extends up and out to the northeast, actually almost 7 miles because of the type of approach that has. I think the point I will make here, and I didn't list as many as I wanted to on this exhibit, but to give you some idea of how high some of these surfaces are around the airport, if you go due east to where I point to what's called the conical surface, at that point, it's about 360. It doesn't extend quite to the football stadium for Texas State. It cuts a little bit short there on the green line, but you would have to be about 360 feet above the ground to get close to penetrating that surface. There's some other areas out to the north or west that I call out there as, it says 350 feet above the ground. That's actually, it's more like 300, and the other one that says 150 is actually more like 100. It would be those elevations based on the elevation of the airport, but obviously the ground changes. So that's, the point I'll try to make though is, unless you're in one of the approach surfaces, these surfaces are pretty high. And so most developments are not going to be an issue. Things like cell towers, telecommunication towers, that would be a different aspect. But the point of our code amendments is that we would require the applicant or the developer to go through a process to ensure that the FAA actually does the check to make sure that it's not going to be a hazard, that it's not going to penetrate these surfaces. So if a developer, or a development rather, meets certain requirements, they're required to file a notice with the FAA. There's actually a very easy to use tool online that anyone can go into. They just give some basic details, and you'll get an answer almost immediately that will tell you if you have to file an actual notice with the FAA. So if you do meet that requirement, the way the ordinance is written is they would just have to provide the notification that they got back from the FAA to say everything's okay, or it needs to put lights on it, or whatever it might be. So really, it's just a case of making sure that we've gone through the process, and that way we can comply with the federal law. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so now we'll move on to the compatible land use zoning. So again, the purpose of this is to protect property occupants in the surrounding areas of the airport from airport activities, to avoid having sensitive land uses in the immediate vicinity of the airport and the runways. It's important to, I think, to make a note here that the FAA has no authority to directly control off-airport land uses beyond the airport property. In fact, they state in their guidance documentation, this is the FAA, airport sponsors and owners are obligated to pursue all reasonable and appropriate actions to secure and promote compatible land use and development within their local areas. The state law does provide the maximum area possible that you could regulate, which is what I show in the exhibit. You may not be able to see the numbers. But essentially, unlike the height hazard zoning, they don't, actually, sorry, let me go back. The maximum area that they define that you could regulate goes 5 miles beyond the ends of each runway, and then 1.5 miles either side of the center line of each runway. Given that we've got 3 runways, if you take account the length of the runway 2, you're talking about 3 rectangles that are more than 10 miles long and 3 miles wide. So it's a pretty significant area. So that's what they give you as the maximum that you could regulate. But unlike the height hazard zoning, the state and federal government doesn't dictate where and how you should zone within that maximum possible area. They just provide guidance on how to do it. In terms of how we came up with what we did, we reviewed several other zoning ordinances, including the City of New Braunfels that put into place their zoning ordinance about 10 or 12 years ago. We've considered safety aspects, impacts from noise from the airport. Ultimately, what you typically see with compatible land use zoning are overlay zones that are focused off the ends of the runways and immediately around the airport. And you'll see here as we go to the next slide that the focus of these zones is like these approach zones in the height hazard zoning that extend off of the runways, because they're the most sensitive parts when it comes to an airport. I would also state that we have not gone beyond anything that the state or federal law allows for in compatible land uses. We have essentially just followed the guidelines on how to go about it. Okay. So what I'm going to try and do here is explain each one of these zones with the various colors. The name of the zone is on the left, and then the compatible land uses in the middle. And so, as I mentioned, the focus is on the areas that extend out from the runways. So I've tried to show this as clearly as possible. If you start on the left-hand side, we have the green zones, which are the runway protection zones. Now, these are defined in our code, in our ordinance, but those areas are actually defined by the FAA. They're almost entirely within the city or airport property boundary or within easements. The FAA already heavily restricts what you can and can't do in a runway protection zone, and really there's nothing that's compatible other than just leaving it as it is or agricultural uses. And it's called the runway protection zone for a reason. The next zone is the light blue color, which extends out from those runway protection zones. We call that Zone 1. The regulation of this zone is also pertains to the purple outline, which is a 500-foot offset from the airport boundary, which we're calling the buffer zone. Here we're saying essentially all types of development are permissible except for residential. So you can do commercial, retail, industrial, recreational are acceptable. With residential being the most sensitive land use pertaining to airports, we're seeking to avoid new residential in those areas. And as I mentioned, that includes the purple line, which is the buffer zone. The same requirements or compatible land uses apply there. The next zone is A2. I guess it's the medium blue color. I should have picked some different colors. This is the same as Zone 1 and the buffer zone. Oh, sorry. This is the same as Zone 1, but now we include residential. But we're limiting the number of dwellings to 3 per acre. So industrial, commercial, and all those uses still apply. There's just a limitation on the density of the residential development. Moving out to whatever that dark blue color is, Zone A3, this is the same as Zone 2, but now the residential development density is to 6 per acre. Finally, I will mention the yellow areas that you see. These are called the transition zones. They mostly match the outline, again, from the height hazard zoning. What we're saying is all types of development are permissible or compatible except with respect of residential, where whatever zone it's adjacent to, that's what it would match. So if the yellow area is next to zone 1, it would be no residential. If it's next to zone 2, it would be the 3 per acre. I want to conclude by stressing that, again, apart from the runway protection zones, which are already owned by the city or within easements, all types of development are allowed other than the residential in zone A1 and the buffer zone, where we're saying new residential wouldn't be appropriate, again, because it's the most sensitive land use. And this was actually, I don't know if you saw it on the news, I think it was the end of July, there was a small light aircraft that crashed into the roof of a house in near Georgetown Municipal Airport. And if you look at the location of where that happened, it was almost in, if not very close to their approach zone to one of the ends of their runways. And it was a reminder of why, this is what we're trying to avoid. Fortunately, I think no one died, but there was some injuries maybe. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, some other aspects of the ordinance. The state law indicates the need for the regulations to be reasonable. So it states that an airport zoning regulation must be reasonable and may impose a requirement or restriction only if the requirement or restriction is reasonably necessary to achieve the purposes of the chapter in the state law, which is the preventing the creation of a airport hazard and avoid having the sensitive land uses immediately around the airport. Regarding height hazards and respect to reasonableness, the ordinance has language in it that says there is no restriction to growing, trees or bushes or whatever, or the construction of a man-made building up to a height of 50 feet. That is what we consider being reasonable use of one's property, is getting up to 50 foot. So there would never be any restriction up to that point. Other aspects, there is variance provisions in there. So one can apply for a variance and that would go to the Board of Adjustments. There is, I think it's important to note, existing non-conforming uses provisions. So anything deemed non-conforming at the time of the adoption of the ordinance, it would not be required to be removed or altered, whether that's the land use or the height of the structure. The code or the ordinance proposed does include some restrictions relating to visual impairments, something that would cause dust or glare on the aircraft, things like that would be restricted to. And I think, next slide, please. Okay, so just a summary here. So, in summary, this hazard zoning and land use ordinance is required. The height hazard zoning essentially enforces the federal regulations that already exist. The compatible land use zones are in compliance with state and federal laws and have been determined based on safety considerations and protecting the neighbouring areas. There are variance and non-conforming provisions, as I mentioned, and the Airport Zoning Commission did approve and recommend what's been prepared. And so the final dates on here are obviously today and then the second reading of the ordinance. Last slide, please. And essentially, we are recommending the approval. The report that's mentioned is what's in your packet that was signed off by the Commission Chair, and we're recommending what we've put together be voted on. And that concludes what I have.
Okay, and now I will open the public hearing and ask if there's anyone in chambers who wishes to speak. If you will state your name and your address, and if you need to, you can pull that microphone closer to you.
Okay. Hello. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. My name is Brian Peters. I live at 36 Mill Road, Maxwell, Texas, 78656. That's in Reedville. My parents, Robert and Carol Peters, and my sister Sharon Peters own Pecan Plantation Mobile Home Park. It abuts the airport property itself. We have approximately 66 acres right now. We currently have 155 places with room for potential expansion. What Mr. Abbott just told you is mostly correct, but one thing he said that's totally incorrect is he mentioned the regional protective zone, that you guys own that. Incorrect. If you look at the purple line on your maps that it's on it's hard to see on this one, it's easier to see on the one that's actually on the website, you're gonna see that we own 3 acres of that. So what he told you is incorrect. I would agree with a lot of things that Mr. Abbott said about the planning of the airport itself. However, I would show you that this Federal Aviation Administration Advisory Circular from 9/16/22, Airport Land Use Compatibility and Planning, he's leaving out the biggest part of this whole thing. There is no compensation for landowners at all here. 50 pages of this 133 pages talks about how for a city or an entity to pay the landowners for their land rights. He has got no activity at all there. He's got a nice plan, but you've got many, many homeowners around there, including ourselves, who have a significant land use loss. For instance, we have the ability right now to have 55 more mobile home sites. Currently, a mobile home site sells for about $100,000 if you sell it to an investor. That's $5.5 million. We have a $5.5 million loss if you guys approve this ordinance tonight. So I would suggest to you that this ordinance itself is completely incorrectly written and that it has no accountability at all for the city of San Marcos to pay the landowners. There's a lot of legal precedent you can see online. Everything's easily to Google nowadays, where airports have the ability, and in this advisory circular also, you could fee simple purchase the land, you could buy land rights, you could buy air rights. Everything is for sale in America. However, you can't take something and just take it for free. Currently, Pecan Plantation has 0 zoning to it. I can build whatever I want. San Marcos plans to take my 0 zoning and put a zoning on it. We know that that is going to diminish the land value of my property. That is incorrect planning on the city's part to think that they're just going to take everybody's land from a land use perspective and not pay anybody for it. That is completely incorrect. We had an open house on March 27, 2023. There was probably 60 people there. They all had the exact same problem as me. I would hope that you would seriously consider voting no against this ordinance, making sure the ordinance is rewritten, to think about the fact that you're opening up yourself to a lot of legal exposure from the simple fact that you're not paying the people that own the land for their land rights. Thank you very much.
Is there anyone else in chambers wishing to speak on this item? Ms. Trevino, I understand that Ms. Capoletta has signed up to speak. There she
Good
is.
evening. Good evening. My name is Professor Lisa Marie Capoletta. I live at 1322 Belvin. Will there be a buffer, and so what it would look like? You have a comment in your packet, and I think it also is relevant to any future developments, and I'd like to read it. It was from Noah Brock on 3/17/23. I'm interested to hear if this airport zoning is taking into consideration the heavy industrial zoning and smart terminal development agreement that will be voted on. And then, of course, we know what happened to that. But we all know it's still on the horizon. That's why the signs are still up. The development agreement has a waiver to be able to stack intermodal containers, rail cars, 80 feet high, and the cranes of these stacks would be upward to 120 to 130 feet and could be directly adjacent to the airport property. Will this be a height obstruction within this new zoning? A lot of us kind of saw how this started all going down when the smart terminal, AKA Axis, came up, and we kind of said, foul play. Now, we can't see y'all's votes on the screen. Maybe it will change in the final rendition of this recording, but we can't see when you guys are hitting your clicker. But they can see the timer, and ironically, it's bigger than the people who speak online. I thought it was really interesting how little discussion there is about how the citizens are paying for infrastructure for the developers. A citizen told me today that many people in this community are choosing between medical insurance, paying the note on their house, and feeding their children. And I don't know if you guys saw the line of the food bank today, but it was all the way down to Mitchell Street. Now, I just wonder how that makes y'all feel with all these different rate hikes that you just recently passed, with the $4 million for the city staff raises and the $88,000 that you spent on a compensation study, yet there's no outgoing paperwork for a former planning director who's now representing the developer. I find that very interesting. Woo! Those olives and peppers are getting me, my little antipasta. Earlier today, you had a speaker, and he was talking about how we're on target with the money And it seems like the city really likes the hot months, which is unfortunate because it really impacts the bottom line. Now, I'm concerned about what happened in December of 2022 with the airport hangar and how it was not properly maintained. This leak was exacerbated, and that's why the Texas Municipal League did not ensure that leakage from a storm damage due to pre-existing poor roof condition, which was reflected in the wear and tear. In his role, Sabas Avila, who was working for the city, who is the caretaker of the property, dropped the ball. They tried to frame it as an emergency, and you guys spend thousands of dollars on a specific damage that should have been upkept. A lot of us are very concerned of how this is going to be used, and I really think that you should have more discussion with this landowner who came up today, and I find it shocking that he's so upset. It doesn't seem like there's been much communication with city staff and the landowner, which is not surprising. Thank you for your time, and God bless San Marcos.
Anyone else wishing to speak on this topic? I will close the public hearing, and I will wait for a motion from council.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve from Mr. Gleason. Is there a second? Second from Mr. Prather. Now is our time for discussion, questions. Mr. Mendoza.
Thank you, sir. Does this airport zoning, does it cross any other city limits or county limits besides San Marcos?
The height hazard zoning goes into the city of Carl's jurisdiction to some extent. Height hazard zoning and the compatible land use zoning does go into Martindale a little bit, and both aspects of height hazard zoning and compatible land use do extend into both the counties, Hayes and Caldwell County.
Do these other municipalities or entities, are they on board with this, or have they been presented?
Yeah,
this
we met
project?
with them last November. We discussed our approach and said that our intention was to act unilaterally. They all understood that there was a requirement for us to have this. The approach that we're taking with them was that we would provide them with the ordinance once adopted and ask them to adopt a similar or same ordinance. Now, there's still some questions of how do we go about making that happen, but in speaking with legal, there may be some situations where we do like an interlocal agreement in terms of how, because, for example, if things are outside our ETJ, how would we know that someone's applying to do something and it gets the various checks? So that's a process that we're working on, but we did meet with them and discuss that this was how we wanted to approach it, and they were on board, and I've kept them in communication with them all the way through, so.
Thank you.
Okay. On the message board, I asked, and it was kind of the same question several different ways. And that was, is there anything in our ordinance that's not already required by federal and state regulations? And the response was no. This is what is in existence already, correct?
I will differentiate. With the height hazard zoning, it's federal regulation already. They've already defined these surfaces, and they're asking, because they can't regulate it themselves, they want the municipalities to do so.
Right.
With the compatible land use zoning, again, the state law gives you a maximum area that you can regulate. Mm-hmm. But there's only guidelines and guidance documentation of what you do within those areas as to how you want to separate it, where you want to say these are the compatible land uses. And so again, the documentation guidance is that you would focus off the ends of the runways and look at those type of things. But they don't tell you, here's the size of the area and these are the compatible land uses. I mean, they give you guidance, but that is really our decision about how we define those areas. But we're not going beyond anything that the state or FAA would say you can do, if that makes sense.
Okay, what I'm looking at is on the ground, there's a couple of housing developments that we've approved in the last 3 or 4 years, I guess, that may be in this area. And so I was asking about, of course, there's a lot of stuff that's been out there for, 50 years too. And so we know that those are legally non-conforming. What I was leading up to is for any existing landowners, are we doing anything that's going to change what they could have done with their property the day before we approve this? That's what I'm looking for, is what are we doing over and above federal and state regulations, if anything? That's what I'm looking for, because I heard what Mr. Peters had to say.
Yeah, so let me try my best to answer the question. I don't believe we're going above and beyond anything that's in the state or federal laws. Now, if there's an area in where we've said, this is a zone where we say there's no new because there's that one zone where we say no new residential. And if because I know that there's some areas of the Highway 21 that have, for example, they were zoned as Character District 3, and that has a 10-unit limitation, and there's some part of that that's in the zone where we would say no residential. If that landowner hasn't submitted an application at this point, we would say that our ordinance, because it's more restrictive, would apply. Now, in the case of all the ones I've looked at off of Highway 21 to the north and to the northeast, I believe they've all got applications in process already, so they're already vested. So at that point, our ordinance can't come in and say them to do something different.
Right.
But, yeah, anything, if you're in a zone past the date of this adoption and you come along and say, now I want to do residential, and you're in that area that says we don't say that's a compatible land use, then, you know, that would be our answer essentially.
So we are imposing some restrictions on people that were not in place, well, if this passes. So that we would be imposing some restrictions on people's property that wasn't true today?
I guess it depends
I think
on...
Mr. Aguirre.
Yeah, a couple of things I want to clarify. I think there's some state law about non-conforming uses, well, in the city limits, of course, or outside, whether we annex or whatnot. There are some provisions of state law that basically say if a use is established through a series of actions, then that use might be grandfathered. But each one is a case by case, and the things that establish the land use may vary from actually pulling permits to an existing use or the showing of an intention to use the land. But again, it's going to be, each property is going to be different. But there can be situations where a use is not viewed as legally non-conforming. So, meaning that we would make them adhere to the new requirements, but it would be case by case. And then the other thing that I think, and I'm not an FAA legal expert, but my understanding is that the height hazard, we're going to have to adopt that. The compatible land uses, it's my understanding that FAA provides guidance, and there's some logical sense to that. You don't want to encourage, large tract subdivisions right next to an airport. However, it's not a mandate on their part. It is the local decision ultimately on those uses. I think the FAA provides guidance, but there is room on the compatible land uses, I believe, for this council to, look at that, or each city can make a local decision about that. And so I could have misunderstood what Kirk was saying, but he wasn't saying we're doing what the FAA is required. We're doing what they would allow, but we have discretion on the land use component of this, just to make clear for everybody.
Well, Scott, that there are some areas that will be subject to additional restrictions on residential development. So that's what I've been trying to track down since this first showed up. I think we looked at it, and then the Planning and Zoning Commission looked at it, is I hate to put it this way, but what are we doing to people in passage of this? How is it going to change their lives? How is it going to change their ability to use their property that's not already can't do because of federal and state regulations today? That's what I need to know. And so in that particular case, is there any, or what is the flexibility that we have that we might need to step back and look at what's here? Now, I understand while those regulations are there, and this is mostly, like you said, the plane crash that was in near the Georgetown airport. that's what all this is about, and I know airspace, and I know the height, and I get those. And so that's why we're talking, clearly height is, you know, you can't have something in the way of a
maybe-
plane that's taken off.
Maybe I can I'll try and flesh this out a little bit more. As Mr. Aguirre said, we've followed the FAA's guidelines, and the state has guidelines on how you go about doing this. And I would say not that it is that pertinent. We followed very closely what the city of New Braunfels had done in terms of these overlay zones. And in fact, the density restrictions and the restrictions on residential is the same as what they've done, following those zones that extend out from the runways. But the whole purpose of this, again, is it's not a good situation, and I think this is understood, to have high density or residential development
yeah.
around.
I understand why. What I'm trying to figure out is, what are we doing to the landowners when we pass this? How's their life going to change? We have Mr. Peters, who has been here and provided us some information, and I also hope somebody's checking on that 3 acres in the purple line
I can
that he
speak to
mentioned.
that a little bit if you
would
want.
be very helpful. Okay, I'll let somebody else ask questions now while I ponder.
If I can add one more thing, I just
Sure,
want to
certainly.
say again, there is no place other than the runway protection zones where we say you cannot do anything.
Okay.
There's just those zones where it's residential that's the issue, and that's where the restriction is. So it's not that nobody can do anything on a piece of property.
That's not true, sir.
Okay, sir, thank you.
The purple area is a buffer zone. I think what's being referred to is a runway protection zones, which were the green areas.
Okay, all right. Council, questions from any of y'all? Mr. Scott?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I kind of got my head around. Now, I am a pilot, and I do think it's very important to have these zones and make sure that they're clear. But if I'm understanding what you said, Sam, is that each case comes up, so if this gentleman wanted to build more, you know, in his area, and still be able to come to us for approval.
There's variance, there's the variance provision.
Depending where it's at.
He's not in the city limits.
Oh, well, I think he would be impacted by that.
Yeah, well, I
But
don't
there-
know. I don't know about ETJ, so,
Right, there would be a restriction on a certain type of building, and if it didn't meet the guidelines or the standards, they would have to request a variance or establish a non-conforming use that's already allowed. And again, non-conforming use is going to depend on each case, but it can be established by what's actually physically on the ground or certain types of permits that have already been pulled in connection with that use. We'd have to look at each one as it comes along. And if they're sort of grandfathered, then they move forward. If they're not, they'd have to seek a variance to move forward.
grandfathered and legally non-conforming are the same thing, right?
That's correct, Mayor.
Okay.
And that
Thank
would come to council, or P and Z, and then the council if they want to.
Yeah, there's a process for that.
But
so,
if it's not in the city limits, is it going to come to us?
I think it would.
through the airport,
Through this new mechanism?
yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
That's what I was understanding. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question
Mr. Wason.
for Mr. Peters. Yes, please.
Yeah, if you'll come to the microphone
Thank you,
so we
please.
get you on video, get you on
Yes, sir.
recording, and we can hear you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
So the 3 acres that you're talking about, is that section between the railroad and Mill Street?
No, sir, it's not. It's actually we have a triangle section in the back of our property, and it's difficult to see if you zoom in on the one here. But there's another one where actually we have a small spot. We have about 15 acres in the back, and there's a small spot that's in the purple zone, and the purple zone is agricultural undeveloped. And so as of right now, and so what Mayor Houston was trying to ask is, will it affect me? Absolutely. If you approve this tonight, tomorrow my land becomes restricted. Or in 2 weeks, whenever you read it for the second time, it becomes restricted. You are now restricting land that is currently unrestricted. Your question was, well, would it have to come to the board? Well, we're in the ETJ, so currently I don't have to come to you to ask for anything. As soon as you pass this, then I have to come to you. So what you're doing is you're providing stipulations on my land, and as anybody would know, and people go through all this. If you put regulations on the land becomes less valuable.
Yeah, I got it. I
And
just
so
wanted to-
we've
I-
got no compensation.
No, I just wanted to clarify that there's a couple different sections here on the map which one you were referring to of the 3 acres.
Kind of a triangle in the back of the
But we
airport.
can let staff work.
No,
with Mr.
but I wanted
Peters.
for my own, but just to
Yes, sir.
see which one he was referring to. That's the only question I had.
Appreciate you, sir.
Mr. Prather? You don't have anything? Okay. Anybody over here?
Mayor, at this time and point, I think I would vote no, but I would like to see more dialogue to make sure both parties understand exactly, and we can understand exactly what's at stake here. I would hate to take any property rights from him that he has now.
I don't either, but then again, if that land is not deemed, I don't really mean it this way, but this is the way I'm gonna say it. If that's not deemed safe to add more structures there, and that's the whole reason why we're doing this, then that's a consideration too. You know, there's a reason why there's restrictions. It's not just because somebody said, I don't want more dwellings out there. So that's the dilemma that I'm in.
And
right
plus,
now.
then that also affect our funding for the federal to grow the airport, how we're trying to grow it. I mean, this is all really a safety measure more than anything else.
Well, and we've been told it's a requirement to have this, but we could make changes to it and still
On
meet the
land use
requirement of having.
aspect. Can I just clarify, the purple line is the buffer zone, and it's the second one down in your list.
Uh-huh.
What we're saying within that, it's a 500-foot offset from the airport boundary. Essentially, you can do anything other than residential within that buffer zone, and it applies to the light blue areas too.
Okay, I'm gonna ask that y'all and Mr. Peters get together, somebody, and look at the lines and figure that
We
out,
can do that.
if you would.
And Mayor, I just want to add, and for my colleagues, sometimes we just have to take the advice of, the boards and commissions that we appoint to give us wise counsel and these kind of things.
My only comment is, Mayor, I would feel a lot more comfortable voting on this if we did have like a concise list of outlines the answer to your question. Like how is this impacting our neighbors out there? Because like I feel like I kind of get it, but then I kind of also don't. Seems a little bit complex. And I know you try to ask the question in multiple different ways, so I appreciate that, but I still feel like I'm a little bit
Yeah, I think it's one of
confused.
those, it depends, and it's complicated. Mr. Mendoza?
Thank you, Mayor. So if we decide not to go with this, I guess I'm just confused here. We're talking FAA, federal government is telling us what we need to do. Do we have the ability to say no?
I would not advise us to do nothing, because they have said that we are obliged to have a height hazard zoning and land use regulation ordinance as part of our grant assurances. And I could quote for you chapter and verse from their advisory circular that says you are obliged to put this in place. Again, on the land use side, it's within our purview of how we go about it. I would stick to that we have put in place, I mean, if you go back to my timeline, we came to council February last year, and here we are now in October of the next year. We have done our due diligence. I understand that there's concerns, and that's why there's the variance provisions in there, so someone can come and say, look, here's my case, here's my situation, take it to the Board of Adjustments and go through that. I don't think it would have been appropriate for us to carve out exceptions within the zones for any particular person. I'm
Oh,
looking
and I'm
at-
not asking for that.
No, I understand. I'm just trying to kind of establish how we haven't just blanket done this and not thought about implications. But I think, again, for the purposes I stated before, the reasons why we're doing it is if you look at Georgetown Municipal Airport, if it wasn't for Interstate 35, that entire airport is surrounded by residential development. And so, again, that is just a circumstance that we're trying to prevent here in the future. And it's to protect those neighborhoods too. It's not just because we just want to say, hey. So I understand, I think you get that. But again, there is the provisions in the ordinance for people to, again, ask for variance and go through a process.
Thank
And
you.
that's why I'm going to support it. I think that he has an opportunity to go through those variances and, you know, have his case presented, and I think it would fly. So I'm going to support this. I think it's important.
Was there a pun intended there or not?
It was, but I didn't know if anybody caught it.
I have one more question, Mayor.
Go ahead.
So, I forgot your name, I'm sorry.
Mr. Peters.
Mr. Peters mentioned did you mention that there was y'all had like a neighborhood forum, or that there's like more neighbors that have these concerns?
It
Oh,
was
my
the,
bad.
Well, it was on one of my slides, March 27th, we had
That's
a
the same one?
public meeting at the airport, yes.
right.
I guess my question to Mr. Peters is that the same meeting that you're referring to? Okay.
Were there others who expressed concerns similar?
Yes,
as
there were
to
others that,
There will be limitations to what I can do with what I own today?
yes, there were similar questions, concerns, yeah.
And Mayor,
Okay.
I can tell you, I attended that public meeting. A lot of the questions had to deal with, would this new ordinance allow me to keep living in my home, be residential?
Oh,
And of course, obviously, that was, we
Yeah.
explained the non-conforming aspect. The other concern was, well, I have plans for my land. And in the great majority of cases, with maybe an exception here, as we showed this chart, what we pointed to is that in every one of these categories, with the exception of the green runway protection zone, you could build commercial, industrial, and the highest and best use for the properties around the airport, you know, would be in those categories. So it wasn't that there was a total prohibition of developing property. Now, you know, where the question comes in is in these lime green areas where the recommended or required compatible land use is undeveloped and agricultural, and those are limited to the ends of the runway. So that answered a lot of the concerns, but certainly there were still some questions, you know, just related to kind of how do we do this in the future? And that's where, as our city attorney said, it is going to be a case-by-case process, and that's where the zoning board of adjustment would come in to hear the specifics of each case.
CBOA hears them, okay.
Once the BRE hears his case, it dies there. Now it goes through the courts.
Say that again?
If ZBOE, zoning boards of
ZBOA.
adjustments, hears his case, it dies there, or does it come back?
Don't ask me.
I think so.
I think it dies there now unless it goes through the courts.
Ms. Hernandez has stepped up, and I think she may be providing us an answer.
Yes, appeals of zoning board of adjustments go to district court.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Yeah, they don't come back.
So-
I thought you were asking if it went from here to CBOA, which it doesn't.
So on these transition zones, on that green section is truly where nothing really wants to be done. And that looks like that's almost every inch of that is on city-owned ground
So let me
anyway.
clarify. It's like 99% within the city-owned airport boundary or an easement. There is a very small portion, and I can clarify exactly what that portion is, that I believe extends into Mr. Peters' property. There's a very small sliver, but it's not, again, let me clarify the acreage, but it is, we've known about that for some time. That's existed for some time.
But the yellow portion could already be approved as the same kind of zoning that's already there. And the gray portions, which are the A1, could be commercial or some other type of non-residential use.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Okay. So are we ready to vote?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I'll just go ahead and say, I'm going to vote for this because we need to get it done. And we may end up as things work along. Sometimes things need changing. And I know staff will be open to looking at those as we move along. Okay, and we're ready to go on to item 9? Hold on. Are we ready to go to item 9 next? Let's take a break before we do that. I was going there. I just got to make sure I know where we're going and where we're going when we come back. So we will take a recess, be back at 8 o'clock.
Wow.
Public hearing portion of our program. We are now at non-consent, item 9. Ms. Trevino.
Consider approval of ordinance 2023-72 on the second of two readings, amending the San Marcos Development Code to, among other things, address changes made in the 2023 legislative session, improve development processes related to development agreements, certificates of appropriateness, demolition by neglect, and parks and open space dedication, add clarity, correct discrepancies within the code, and incorporate city council direction for code amendments, including improved historic district and landmark designation criteria, increasing the occupancy restriction limit from 2 to 3 unrelated persons, creating a new business park zoning district, and making waste-related services a conditional use in all instances, providing a savings clause, and providing for the repeal of any conflicting provisions, and providing an effective date.
Motion to approve.
Motion from Mr. Gleason, second from? Second from Mr. Prather.
Mayor.
Ms. Hernandez. Ms. Hernandez has a presentation to make,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I
Yes.
believe.
I do, just a
Okay.
few slides, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Next slide. At your meeting on September 19th, these code amendments were approved 6-1 on first reading with one additional amendment added. There was a motion to deny the change in occupancy restrictions, which failed 3-4. City Council discussed a handful of topics, and we heard concerns from the community, so my slides are focusing on those topics. Next slide. First is the amendment to remove staff's ability to administratively approve CUP in certain conditions and with very specific circumstances. I heard earlier that it sounded like we were taking away the planning commission role in conditional use permits, and that's not the case. That's not what this section is for. On the message board, I provided some alternate language, which is also provided on this slide. For the first bullet, we're trying to align this with transfer of TABC licenses to a new person or a new business when someone comes in and buys a business. And staff would like the provision to remain and offered some additional language to indicate that staff can't change the expiration date of the already approved permit. We would just be transferring that in the same way that TABC transfers. The third bullet allows staff to administratively approve certain CUP renewals if an applicant is in good standing. And staff provided language to indicate that this cannot be for a bar, for instance, and provided a list of criteria for good standing, because that did come up at Planning Commission as well. And one of those things is that the permit cannot be expired. So if someone is a day late on getting their renewal, they're not in good standing, they have to go through the P&Z process. We also proposed an additional bullet number 4 to ensure that no approvals exceed the 3 years, which is what the code limits P&Z approvals to. In the last 3 years, staff has only approved 5 CUP administratively and has only approved each of those for a single year. There is a conditional use permit committee that was established late last year to discuss noise conditions for conditional use permits. So we also considered that maybe this topic could go to the CUP committee for further discussion, and then an action or motion could come back to City Council.
Is that for all of this?
This all could go to that committee, yes, ma'am. And it could stay as is, or council could make the amendment that's on the floor. So the motion currently on the floor is to remove numbers 1 and 3 from this list. And you
Actually,
could-
that was passed. That's not a motion that's currently on the floor. That was passed at the last meeting.
You're right. Apologies for that. So in order to undo it, we would need a motion to amend that approved motion from the last meeting.
And it would mean bringing all of this in the black back, the 1 and 3, not
1
just
and-
the red.
Right, 1 and 3 would come back. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that clarification. On the next slide, at the last meeting, there was a concern with one of the bullets dealing with the signage for public parks. And when we went back and looked at that section as a whole, it's very clear in letter F, and 1, 2, and 3 are subsets of F, that the 1, 2, and 3 are for public parks. And that's the very last sentence of that letter F, public park access shall meet the following requirements. So staff did not make any changes or have any recommendations because we didn't think that the amendment to this section was necessary. I know Mayor Houston has some language that we will probably look at this evening.
I'm going to make a motion to undo it.
On the next slide, there was a discussion about removing the exception for smaller project to provide parks or to pay a fee in lieu. And staff initially recommended, when we took this forward to Planning and Zoning Commission, an exception for 4 units. We went to the Parks and Recreation Board, and they recommended or made a suggestion to increase the exception to 8 units. Staff is okay with 4 or 8, but wanted to let you know that this provision was initially intended to align with minor plats. Minor plats are allowed for projects that are 4 units or less that have access to infrastructure. They're typically used for infill development where services and infrastructure already exist. So when we think of infrastructure, we think about roads and utilities, but staff also, meeting with the Parks and Recreation Department staff, felt that properties would also likely be served by our existing park system, and that they wouldn't necessarily need to provide additional parks for a development that was only 4 units. Staff would like to keep that exemption as is or increase from 4 to 8. Again, we're okay with either of those 2 options. Next slide. There was quite a bit of discussion about the notice requirements at the last meeting, and just wanted to remind everyone that the current proposed amendment that was approved at the last meeting was to add personal notice for development agreements. So that was the topic of discussion at the time. And we're adding the personal notice so that way the neighbors get a letter in the mail. Because right now, only a notice in the newspaper is required, and a lot of people may not see those. So that's the amendment that's in the code. And on the next slide, I just wanted to provide a summary of where we in our city code go above and beyond state law. So adding that personal notice for development agreements, providing twice the radius on those personal notices. We also require posted notice and notice of application, which are those push notifications you get for zoning and annexation.
May I ask a question? We have a system where people can sign up to receive notices on these type of things. Will development agreements be, if I'm signed up to receive those, can development agreements be part of what I'm going to get, or do I need to go in and do something different? Is that something you can do on your end if everybody thinks it's a good idea?
You would have to be signed up for the planning application notices. And the amendment to the code as currently written, currently approved, does not include application notice. So if you wanted to add the push notice, it would be to add application notice to table 2.1.
Okay. But we do have a mechanism that people can sign up for to receive a different types of notices from y'all, and so that you get them all, but
yes,
you don't miss any.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
On the next slide, it's just kind of a summary. Staff started thinking about some of the ideas proposed at the last meeting, and we had some concerns with the increased buffer based on the size of development. One, that an applicant, if you set it at 500, may come in with 499 and then 499 more. So it may not get us where we want to go, and we really like to see those projects as a whole. That way we can look at connectivity, infrastructure, things like that. So at this point, we don't recommend changing the notification requirements with this amendment. I do like the change to table 2.1 that Mayor Houston just brought up. We'd be perfectly fine with that. But there is also a notification committee that was established late last year, and we got a list of comments and questions, concerns from Mayor Houston that we would gladly add to that notification committee agenda when we meet, and hopefully we will be meeting very soon. Next slide. We talked a little bit about the rooftop amenities and how council, if it's on the roof, said it should be counted as a second story. So we provided some alternate language that we recommend to say that if you are using the roof of your building, it would be counted as an additional story. Now, what does that look like? If you have a 2-story building in single family, that's it, you're capped. It's a 2-story limit in that particular zoning district. But if you had a 2-story building where 3 stories was the limit, you could potentially use that rooftop area as an amenity center. Amenity area. Next slide. The following 2 slides are provided to address some of the public comments we heard during the public hearing. First, in reference to the limited scope and lack of public process for these amendments. I know that came up, but we're not at the point where we are doing a comprehensive overhaul of our development code. That will come after the comprehensive plan is adopted, and we have plans to do public outreach and make that a very open process. But this scope was so limited, it was really based on what we had to do by state law and what y'all had asked us to do. There was a statement that development agreement amendments do not follow the same process as a development agreement, a new one, and just wanted to state that that is not true. The code specifically says if you're going to amend a development agreement, go follow the process. Same exact process. There was a discussion at Planning and Zoning Commission about why manufactured home zoning is considered a special district. The answer to that was we really didn't know. It wasn't included in the city council presentation because it was only a discussion item. Planning and Zoning Commission did not make a recommendation to city council. We've heard these concerns at a staff level, and we think that that would be good to look at during that comprehensive overhaul after the comp plan is adopted. Next slide. Someone brought up table 4.1 in the development code, which is where we take the preferred scenario map and our zoning districts and say what goes with what. And specifically how low intensity allows an applicant or a property owner to request really any zoning district. Some are not preferred, some are. And this will actually change when we do that update. Take that back. This will actually change when we adopt our comprehensive plan. We are going from the 5 or 6 categories that you see on the left to the 9 categories that you see on the right. So we have to do something with that right away, and you'll start to see some of those zoning districts get broken out based on the preferred scenario map designation. Next slide. All right, so this is my summary slide. We have our second reading this evening. You can keep the amendment that was approved last time as is, or potentially modify it based on staff's recommendation. And then based on my presentation today, there are some additional amendments that could potentially be presented on second reading. And I put other there because y'all may have come up with something since our last meeting, and we're happy to talk through that. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, to start with, on the parkland dedication. My amendment was reacting to just the snippet that was on the slide, which I didn't look at it in the whole thing. I still think it can be misinterpreted, but I was not elegant in the way that I did this. I was hoping for better wording, but I'm okay with deleting that. So I'm going to make a motion to amend the LDC that's before us tonight. Section 3.10.1.2, parkland dedication, F, park access, to delete the words that I added last time, which is that is dedicated to the city. And I would appreciate a second. A second from Ms. Garza, thank you. Are there any questions on this one? Ms. Trevino, let's vote. All right, and then on the rooftop portion, Section 4341, measuring height, F, rooftop amenities. Rooftop amenities are usable floor area on or above the finished roof line. What's there that was if there's 25%, it allows you to have 25%. My point was if somebody builds that structure to where you can use 25%, they're probably doing the whole thing. They're going to use the whole thing. So let's just call it what it is. And so staff has kindly provided some text for me. Thank you. And so my motion is to replace shall be included in the building height measurement and shall not be greater than 25% of the area of the first floor of the structure. If equal to or greater than 25% of the first floor of the structure shall be counted as an additional story. Change that, delete that, and insert rooftop amenities or usable floor area on or above the finished roof line. Usable floor area provided on or above the finished roof line shall be counted as an additional story. That's
I'll
my,
second that motion.
thank you very much. Seconded by Mr. Gleason. Are there any questions to any of that? Basically, it goes from 25%. If you're going to do anything up there, it counts. All right, let's vote. All right, thank you. I'll let anybody else, I've got a couple more things, but I'll let others jump in. Mr. Mendoza.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I'd like to make an amendment that we have for the occupancy restrictions. I'd like to go ahead, instead of limiting it from 2 to 3, I'd still like to go ahead and keep it at 2.
So you want to change 3 to 2?
Well, right now it sits at just changing 2 to 3. I'd
No,
like to just.
we changed it to 3 last time.
My apologies then, yes, I'd like to go from 3 to 2 now.
Okay, you want to strike 3,
So strike 3 and I'd like to have
insert 2.
Yes, ma'am. And I'd
I'm
like to just
sorry.
mention that
It's
we had
3 to 2.
three of our citizens come up and speak about this and let us know their opposition to making it 3. Mrs. Davis, Mr. Saucedo, and Professor Capoletta, all from different neighborhoods, and they made strong points on this one. And again, it's not trying to hurt the families and the residents. It's actually, my concern is our developers and our management companies coming in here and using that 3 as just free-for-all. I know we've said that this is not usually enforced unless somebody complains about it, but that's how most of our code compliances go.
Hold
I don't
on.
see.
I need to get a second.
Oh,
To your motion.
sorry.
All right. Now,
Still
please
learning.
continue. My bad.
Thank you. No, it's my apologies on that.
Better late than never.
Yes, ma'am. So it's just another way, and again, you all know how strongly I feel about single-family neighborhoods. This city really is based upon it. Look at all the neighborhoods that we all try to go into. Please consider using this as a tool for us to maintain single-family neighborhoods for our code compliances to do their job. Again, I'm not trying to affect mom and pops that have their cousins or their sisters related to them. It's not that. It's, again, these developers, people who have no connection to our community.
It's taking, and the rate at which single-family homes are going off the market for
Very
owner-occupied.
quickly. Yes, ma'am. And many
And they're
cities
going
have
for
so.
rentals, and that's my concern, that's what I've been hearing from people, is that if we do this, more single-family homes will not be available for families and will be rental. Rental is okay, it's just we are really skewed on our rental to homeownership ratio in San Marcos. Ms. Hernandez, is it still 70-30-ish?
I believe so, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and that's 30 owned. So that's why I'm going to support
Well,
this.
one of the reasons this went into, was put out there to begin with is to help people in general. A couple of things that people have brought to our attention is taxes, can't afford them. It's easier to rent a room to a student or something like that. And when I was a student, I was fortunate to get a room for $200 a month. And if I didn't have that opportunity, I probably wouldn't have made it through college. And there's lots of students that could help in the community in houses with taxes just for that reason. I don't buy the houses being bought up story because they're too expensive, first of all, just to buy up unless you're going to own them. But I think it's important.
If somebody's going to buy one, they're looking to own it.
What's that? Well, that's not what I meant.
Okay.
Actually, if I could bring up the property, the neighborhood that we have across from Rattler Stadium, do you remember when that was being built, they were promising, single-family homes? Well, a good friend of mine who came in there and was one of the first homeowners to buy there, ended up being out that I think it was something like 26 or 27% within the first year were purchased by developers. They were not purchased by single-family home owners. And now they still sit
And
as rental properties.
FYI, CD3 does not have occupancy restrictions, which a lot of our new stuff is. A family who has a spare room to rent and rents to a student, a person who's not related, is allowed with the limit of 2.
Now, if you already have a house with 2 students in there that aren't related.
Well, that's different, but you were talking about a family and a
That's
student.
who complained or asked us to begin with.
But the example that you gave, a family renting out to a student, that is okay with 2.
But it
As
does
long as
kind
they're, again, that they're not related, so.
At what point, okay, so let's go 2, let's go 3. At what point does it turn into a small apartment complex?
There's going to be other councils and more opportunities for our neighbors to weigh in those situations.
Well, we just had 3.
3 out of
Okay,
60,000.
let me
Three
let
that spoke.
Mr.
Yes.
Prather speak.
So, Amanda, I came across other cities that have similar ordinances. College Station had no more than 4, I think I read in. Are you aware of any other cities that have certain type of restrictions like that?
No, I'm not totally familiar,
I've seen a list, but it was a long time ago.
and I don't know if any of those have changed. It's been a long time since we've pulled
Yeah.
any list, so I don't.
Yeah,
know for
that's
sure.
true. We don't know if it's still the case or not.
There's been times in my home, that I had more than 3 or more than 2 unrelated people living in my home. And just thinking out loud, I'm like, well, if it's an owner-occupied home, how do we tell someone, this is your home, but you can only have these certain amount of people living there? So I've thought, should we have an amendment that if it's an owner-occupied home, that no more than 3, because it's your home? But
That's a thought.
it is a thought, but I'm trying to weigh that between the rising crisis of housing affordability. I think that is one of the most critical issues that our citizens are facing. And I think by doing that, even if it is an investor that bought a house that's gonna rent it out, by still capping it at 2 because it's not owner occupied, are we muffling this potential effect to bring down housing costs?
I bring up the incident we had with Minneapolis. They were one of the first cities in 2019 to establish basically the step, they got rid of occupancy to focus on getting rid of single-family homes. They are now still in the process right now of going back because they found that it wasn't helping with the housing community. It was going through and affecting.
I saw a very interesting article in Bloomberg a couple months ago about, it was like Minnesota was one of the few cities that the cost of inflation, don't quote me, but it was in the single digits. It was an outlier across the country, potentially because of some of these changes they made to their residential regulations. I'm torn. This used to be like the third rail of San Marcos politics, SF6 zoning, but I really think the crisis of housing affordability is one of the #1 issues our citizens are facing. This could be a potential way to address that. I've brought forward the idea of what about if it is owner occupied, could we raise it up to 3? I think that could be a good compromise to prevent institutional investors buying up homes and renting them out to 3 people. And we keep talking students. That's a portion of the population, but ultimately it's all kinds of folks that are trying to find affordable places to live, renting out a bedroom and stuff. I think San Marcos is an outlier in our regulations regarding this with that too.
You just brought up a really important part, is that this only applies to SF6 and CD3 special, whatever that one was that one subdivision wanted. This does not apply to duplexes, doesn't apply to multifamily, doesn't apply to any of our new CD3. There's a limited area and zoning that this applies to. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And I think maybe we know that, but anybody watching may not know that. So this just affects single-family neighborhoods, and it's FF6 and 4.5 and
Yes, most of our conventional residential, the SF districts. And if anybody's watching and has questions about their particular property, give us a call, and we're happy to give them that information, whether it applies.
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
So my comment, I mean, I've said this multiple times, occupancy restrictions are rooted in racism and classism, and any sentiment that I've heard, like supporting this amendment to revert back to a lower number, like I haven't yet to hear anybody address, like the real complexity and composition of families in San Marcos. Like I hear your concerns to protect families, but this amendment doesn't do that in a meaningful way. And I mean, let's be for real. We have neighbors that are still to this day displaced by the floods, like who had to adapt to the lack of resources needed to stay in their homes or rebuild their homes, right? And we've had people, like they just had to pivot, right? And they had to adapt, so they move in with their comadre, whatever. And we have people living together who are, they're considered chosen family, and a lot of those situations are out of necessity, right? So we have so many situations where it's like 2 single caregivers who have, 3 kids, 4 kids each. And they want to live in these neighborhoods. They cannot afford to live in these neighborhoods with these type of restrictions. And they're not problematic neighbors. They care. A lot of them are born and raised here, and they care about the neighbors in the neighborhoods. So I understand, like, we want to protect, very limited, this type of housing, from the big bad developers. I think we also have to be, just aware of and considerate of a lot of our neighbors who are struggling. This is all they have access to.
And we've had time and time again, code compliance has come up here and said that this is not enforced unless it's complained upon.
So then,
Just like
why change it just for symbolism?
Because it is a code. Why would you allow flexibility? And this is where I was saying, it doesn't affect the mom and pops, those who actually need help here. It affects those who are sitting there going, well, I want to purchase a home. Again, look at these neighborhoods that are established neighborhoods: Valle Pascal, Sunset Acres, East Guadalupe, Victory Gardens, Rio Vista. If you go and walk around, you'll see these neighborhoods and these homes that are selling, that are normally worth $180,000, $140,000, are selling for $500,000 cash from out-of-town owners. And what's happening here is, and again, I'll give you 3 homes on the 1100 block of Field Street that are selling for over $400,000 that have mold and are deteriorated. So what's gonna happen there, the same thing that happened at one of the other houses on Cheatham Street, is the developer comes in here from another state, doesn't do any changes, and immediately starts renting it out to many more people. I'm trying to protect our renters. I'm trying to protect our homes that are being taken away by people coming in here that see the growth. I mean, we're gonna talk about number 17 here for rent by room apartment complex or student housing. There is a need for people to come in here and developers to come in here and do their thing. I mean, we're being bombarded by this every single time we come to council. I'm just trying to protect, again, this doesn't affect the new neighborhoods coming in here. It's established neighborhoods for people who have generational wealth, the minorities, the people who live in those neighborhoods. But that's the majority of it. That's what we want to categorize racism. These are people of the minority who live in these neighborhoods, who've lived there for 50, 60, 70 years.
Yeah, I do not accept that this was created in San Marcos, Texas, initially due to racism.
No, like the history of occupancy restrictions generally.
But not in San Marcos.
Nobody said San Marcos.
You said that was the history, as if it were San Marcos.
If you're internalizing that and interpreting it that way, that's on you, Mayor.
Then we
'Cause
should
those were not
specify
my
to
words.
say not San Marcos.
Well, that's on you.
Yeah, because I don't care what it is elsewhere, but concerned about here. I do have a question, though. If I have 3 children, and she has 3 children, not our cat children, but real children, and we decide that we're going to share a home, is that legit?
Yep.
That's the way I would see it, but that was an example that you gave that wouldn't be allowed.
There's so
Still have
many
somebody else.
stipulations of okay, people who have different last names, if all the kids have different last names.
Doesn't mean you're not related.
It's like, you're trying to protect people from the developers coming in, da-da-da-da. I don't understand how y'all don't understand how things like this can be weaponized towards other like, I don't
You're generalizing it
care.
that we're gonna use it to weaponize. We're not doing
No,
that to
it
weaponize.
can be.
Uh,
I think there's a higher possibility of it being
Councilman.
weaponized than
Mr.
this doing
Mendoza, let
anything
her talk.
to protect us from the big bad developers. That's gonna happen regardless of what this says. There's other measures, meaningful measures we can take to prevent that.
Ms. Garza, any decision we make on here can be categorized, and that's any decision we ever make as weaponizing it to somebody.
Whatever.
I will agree that I do not like the way that it's defined. I think it's complex, and I hate to think that I didn't catch that when the Land Development Code was created. This whole thing about different last names and cars, the definition we had before was a whole lot clearer. So
Okay.
I'm not crazy about the definition and the way it's created, because different last names, I'm sorry, I've been married 3 times, and 2 of them I didn't change my name. So,
Then Mayor, is
That-
there something we can
yeah.
do to, let's take this off the books right now. Let's define it a little bit more in detail. I mean, would that be satisfactory for everybody?
is there anything, any way that we can meet in the middle, and that it's 2 in certain cases, 3 in others? The 3 could be temporary because your brother-in-law lost his job and needs to move his family in with yours temporarily, and then, it's not forever. Is there anything that we could do to come to some kind of middle ground on this?
Well, and that's why I think a great question here is, would we be able to come up with something with owner occupied on this?
I think owner occupied is a good.
I agree with Mr. Prather on this.
Okay.
Would that be a possibility, and does staff think that's legal and maybe something we could potentially move forward for?
When you say legal, I look over and see an empty chair, but.
Yeah, we'll ask him when he gets back.
Is it possible to put in there that the occupancy restriction can be increased if the property is owner occupied? Sure, but is it homestead exemption? How do we prove that the owner actually lives there versus, they,
It's one of the names, like it's
they
one
have
of the-
they have a phone bill or a bill, maybe they don't actually live there, but a bill's in their name, so it would be enforcement and just verification that would be
I mean, that's a way,
potentially hard to manage?
I just personally know so many upstanding citizens that have 2 other people living with them, big deal.
I've been one of them.
Right.
I've been
just-
one of them. Like,
Let's
it's-
just be honest.
But, but by providing that place, like, hey, I got an extra room, like, what, $400, we'll call it even, a month, like, by providing those type of living situations, you're providing affordable housing in your community.
Yeah,
I
we
just
could-
feel like that's like privileging people who are able to afford their homes.
Well, my big concern is not even the purchases, it's keeping people in the homes. If you have a spouse who gets injured at work, loses a job, and you have a couple additional bedrooms that you need to, fill some space and time and get some income in for a couple months, or have a relative that's down and out, have something happen in an emergency, and there's always a lot of questions when this stuff comes on, and my philosophy has changed a little bit on this. I don't think it's gonna make one bit of difference on the investors. We're talking about so few. If they want them, they're gonna buy them and they're gonna pack them full. We're really talking about enforcement and what makes sense for practicality reasons. Things have changed the cost of houses. There's no doubt about it. And one of our big things is affordable housing. And so, I'm not gonna be in support of moving it back to 2, but I would be open to potentially making this owner occupied, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do. As an investor, I'm not worried about if he has to lose his tenants. That's on them, but if someone who owns it and is doing that, so I would like to hear from legal and staff if they think, because I'm gonna make that motion if we think we can do that. Although we have a motion on the floor already, we'd have to vote on first, but.
We'll see how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we
But it might-
can kind of start talking about that, because it may affect our vote
That's
on
ex-
this,
that's
although
exactly-
normally that is not what we would do.
That's exactly.
But they're related. And then we will need to take care of the one, and then if you'll grab code and,
Yeah, I didn't pull the code up.
okay, it's,
Mr. Hernandez has got fast fingers over there.
it's
And I believe-
5141.
Okay.
I believe there is the ability to make one amendment to a pending amendment, and then vote on that. So in other words, the pending amendment, you could have a motion to amend that. And then if it passes, then you approve the amendment.
You can make an
As
amendment to
amended.
the amendment that he has
Okay.
proposed.
But only
I-
once, not
I
10.
try to separate that, but
Well,
if that's what you're
yeah,
saying,
I'm not saying you have to do that, but that's one option, just
yeah,
pending.
I try to keep them separate when possible.
And can I,
Well, I think we're hearing that it's, could be potentially possible. Mr. Hernandez has got something to say over
Can
there.
go ahead, I think we're probably gonna say the same thing.
yeah, I just wanted to
Go
make
right
sure
ahead.
that Mr. Aguirre understood the question, which was, can we restrict occupancy restrictions for homesteads or homeowner, owner occupied, whether we do it in one motion or 2? And I thought that that's probably something we could put in there, but potentially would be hard to.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, so.
When you stepped out for a minute.
That's a tough one. I can't say with certainty whether that would fly or not. I think I would say it's presumed it will, but there are some pending, cases out there regarding STRs and stuff, and the distinction between,
Yeah.
owner occupied and whatnot. How this would impact something like this is uncertain, but, that's just something to be aware of. I couldn't tell you with
Okay.
certainty it's a problem or not at this point.
I will tell y'all that I'm going to make a motion to postpone the whole thing for like 2 council meetings, because we've got several things that I haven't brought up yet that we could refine, but we're not gonna do them here, or we'd be here till midnight. We still might not come up with the best solution as we do when we could have staff support and we can think about it. So, doing what we're talking about, if there's some kind of compromise, if there's something else that we can come up with, I don't think we're gonna come up with the best thing right this minute. But if we're gonna postpone this, then that can happen. We just need to figure out how that's going to happen. Do we want a council committee that's gonna meet one time, knock it out and figure out what we're gonna do? Or if we're gonna give thoughts and let the staff come up with some wording, which I think is always great. So,
I'm open to letting staff work on this a little bit. We blindsided you with this one.
we gotta give them some guidance.
Yeah, but I would like, staff to look into that, and I'm open to having a council committee one-time meet with some input from staff of what we potentially could do there. And I'm just throwing my 2 cents of well, you've heard what I think I would like to support.
Mr. Mendoza, one thing, and then we
Yes,
need,
ma'am. My
we need to vote
concern-
and move on.
Yes, ma'am. My concern is postponing it. I'll do what my colleagues want, absolutely, but we were so emphatic and happy about the historic district change in the designation that how will this negatively affect that part of,
We've been working on this for 18 months,
okay.
almost.
Mayor, may I say just a few things before we vote on this?
Yes, go ahead.
Motion, when I brought up that idea about the owner occupied, even I was torn on that because I don't think it's gonna help address inflation and housing costs. And the other thing I just want to point out, other college cities in Texas that have similar ordinances, Denton has 4, College Station has no more than 4 unrelated people. So ours at 2 is a little bit of an outlier.
Okay. Thank you for looking that up. Okay, so we're going to vote now on Mr. Mendoza's motion to change it from 3 to 2. And whenever we finish that, I'll give you a couple of minutes let's think about what direction we might give to a committee or maybe just 1 or 2 people. And we'll figure that out.
I'm willing to withdraw my amendment if we go directly to,
Oh, this shouldn't be letting us vote yet. Okay.
if I take away my amendment, will that allow us to go ahead and go directly into talking about?
We're going to talk about it anyway,
Okay.
even if we vote.
Yeah, let's go vote. Let's vote. Let's just see what happens. Let's vote.
All right, well, Mr. Scott's ahead of us.
Motion to go back to 2.
The motion is to go back
Yes,
to
motion to
2.
go back to 2. Worth a shot.
You've got to hit a button. Okay. So is there any, I like looking at the homeowner, but still, if we want to talk about blended families, families where people aren't necessarily married because you've got friends living with you for various reasons, I don't know if that's going to fix. Do what?
This isn't just one thing, right?
This was just the 3 to 2 is all we were talking about. I'm still trying to find a compromise.
Okay, but this
there
is
may
the
not.
only thing that she read on this thing we're voting on, right?
We already voted.
That was just
We
on the
did it.
amendment.
Okay,
That was just on the amendment.
okay.
That was just on the
Talking about-
amendment
hold on.
from 3 to 2. So,
Is it-
do you think that it's worth one meeting, one time, to see if there's something you can do to hash this out? I'm not thinking of what direction there might be, but we can let the committee come up with whatever. Mr. Gary, can we appoint a committee on the fly? On a topic that is on the agenda, land development code changes,
No,
and this is
that's
one of
all
the
right.
changes highlighted?
You're wanting direction on this item, and it's sort of a condition. Let me put it this way, there's a motion to approve the LDC amendments as is. You're essentially making it a condition to look at this topic further, and so I think it's
no.
appropriate. Well, I'm just saying, you're looking at this topic further. I think it's appropriate to
Okay,
have somebody look into that so you can come back.
okay. Do we have volunteers?
Volunteer.
Ms. Garza is volunteering, we have Mr. Mendoza who's volunteering,
I'll volunteer.
and Mr. Gleason. Are there any others? We can't have 4. Do you want to make us vote on y'all? Okay. Okay.
And Mayor, I would just point out too, that depending on what the committee or whatever comes up with, if it's a major substantive change, it's often the council's direction to have the P and Z look at it. Just depends on what it is, so that's,
They went 4-4.
All right, so, just depends
So
what it
they
is.
were-
Depending what the
they were split
recommendation is, but if
also.
it's just a minor thing, it moves forward with council.
Mayor, I'm almost at the point we should just go ahead and vote on this now because.
We did.
Well, I mean, just, let's just go ahead and vote on, what's in front of us versus really kind of just not dragging this out, but trying to, cook this more. But the fact that P and Z already waited on this, it's kind of, they gave us like a neutral opinion. If we were taking it from 2 to none, you know, like no restrictions, I'd be, yeah, that's a little bit shock to the system. I really think having 3 is a balanced approach to realistic housing in a 3-bedroom, 2-bath homes for, you know, folks. I really think we should just go ahead and vote on this now versus kind of drawing this out and making it more of an issue than it needs to
We've
be.
already voted on the amendment. It stands at 3.
Okay.
It stands at 3.
Okay.
But I'm still looking for a compromise. We've got 3 people that are willing to work on trying to find a compromise. They may not. They may come back with 3 options. I don't know. We'll leave that up to them. But can we let them try?
Well, my big thing is giving staff just a few minutes to, you know, a week or 2 to 3 weeks to come up with some language. That's the big thing here is I think if we.
Well, they're going to work with the 3 of y'all.
Well, that's what I mean. If we voted on this right now, we haven't really had a chance to let staff kind of work at this a minute.
Okay, can we just move on with this one? Do I need to make a motion that we appoint these 3 people to a
Wait.
council committee?
Hold on.
I think that's
Hold on just a second.
the council process is that they're not appointed just by the mayor, so
Usually-
usually council needs to approve it.
We need to vote to approve them. Okay. I'll let Ms. Garza has something to say, and then I'll make that motion.
Oh, I'm like absorbing what Mr. Prather said. And just correct me if I'm not capturing what you were trying to articulate. Like, okay, we already voted. It's 3. Is it really worth it to committee this, right? Honestly, like, there's 2 committees that we formed, and we haven't met yet, because I'm very busy and tired. I mean, like, is it good use of our time? Like,
Well,
it's not that
if
deep,
you
but
don't
let's
want to serve
go.
on the committee, I think Mr. Gonzalez wants to.
If there's a committee, I want to serve on it. I don't even think it's like necessary, like, let's just, but whatever. I felt what you were saying, Jude, but I guess we'll give it an opportunity for dialogue, I guess.
I'm going to make a motion to appoint a committee, and we'll see if that motion passes.
You're the boss, applesauce.
So that's my motion, is that we appoint a council committee comprised of Ms. Garza, Mr. Mendoza, and Mr. Gleason, and I await a second.
I'll second it.
Okay, so, did you second it? Okay. Mr. Gleason is a second, so we're going to vote on, are we going to appoint a committee or not? And if we do, Ms. Garza, Mr. Gleason, Mr. Mendoza.
Motion passes 6-1.
Okay, so that will happen. We're going to leave that in your capable hands, Ms. Hernandez.
Yes.
Pull that group together.
The city council committee rules and procedures say that you may appoint a chair at this time if you would like. If not, we will have to appoint a chair and go through all of that. The one thing I will ask of the committee members is to respond to my email, because we do still have a couple of committees that have not been scheduled.
And do we have a volunteer for a chair, Mr. Mendoza? And I should have had that as part of my motion. Are y'all good with Mr. Mendoza chairing this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you for reminding me that. Okay, so we are through with this one, we are through with that one. Mr. Hernandez, right now, on the parkland dedication, if it's 4 or less, that's the way it stands right now, is they don't have to worry about a parkland dedication or fee in lieu, correct?
Staff's recommendation at the last meeting was to increase to 8 based on the park
Right, but it sits
suggestion.
as 4 right now, so if we want to do an 8, someone needs to make a motion. That's where I was going with that.
I don't know that we had a motion outside of staff's recommendation, which was as presented, so I would have taken that as 8.
Which way that's why I was asking,
Yeah.
which way is it presented to us? So if we vote on it without making a change, which way is it? Because I saw 4.
Yes, and I started thinking about that when you mentioned the motion for approval. Staff's presentation was a recommendation as presented, which would have been with the 8.
That's not what that says.
So originally presented at 4, presented to city council with 8, motion to approve did not pick 4 or 8 last time.
Well, because I thought it was it was 4.
I don't think it would hurt to have a motion to clarify that.
That's where I was going with that, is
Yes,
let's get it out there and let's figure it out. So, council, what do y'all think? I would appreciate a motion either way. We started with 4, Parks Board said 8. I kind of didn't want any because I don't necessarily want the parkland, but this is more, because you only got 4 lots. But it was, could there be a fee in lieu? I was looking at if this is Brownfield, Greenfield, whatever, there's not anybody living there now. And now we're going to have more people living in that area. It might be nice to get a few bucks to go into the Parks Fund for the parks that they're going to use. That was my point.
The way
But-
the exception is currently written is that it would be exempt from the entire section, so no fee in lieu and no dedication. Because we typically see this in smaller infield and not really greenfield. Greenfield developers make their
Right.
money on the large developments.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, my point was anytime you're adding houses, you're adding more people that are going to be in the parks. It might be nice to get some bucks. However, because these are often infill and I'm going to hope probably more likely to be affordable housing, let's not add any dollars to it. So, waiting for a motion to see if we want new development. See, that says 4. 4 or 8. Somebody would make a motion. You can make it 6.
6.
Oh,
We just need to get on with this meeting.
okay, so, Mr. Gonzalez, are you making a motion that it be 6?
Yes.
Okay, so exemption 6 for Mr. Gonzalez. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Mendoza. Any questions? If not, we will vote on an exemption. That means no fee in lieu or parkland dedication. If it's 6 or fewer.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Three.
Okay, Jude, Shane, and Lisa are no. Okay. Okay, so that passes, so we've clarified what it was.
Thank you.
On notification, I put some ideas out on the message board. I did not clarify, my bad, when I was talking about better signs in steel frames, et cetera, to ensure they hold up in the wind and other weather, perhaps larger signs, distribute more signs in a wider area, include all intersections within a certain radius to be determined. Maybe, if they're available, our message trailers at key intersections. This was not for every zoning case. This is for like 200 acres and up, or maybe 500. I understand what you're saying about people might do the incremental, and I'm hoping that just wouldn't happen. But anyway, my suggestion is that this go to the committee that we already have appointed for notifications. That is Mr. Gonzalez, Mr. Mendoza, and Mr. Gleason. And we also have 3 P&Z members. Ms. Cosia, Mr. Garber, and Mr. Spell are on that committee. So my suggestion is to give it to the committee. You are not limited to anything I came up with. There was also a suggestion by a member of the public that depending on the acreage, the noticed area be larger. I couldn't even wrap my head around that quite yet. So anyway, I would say we would just let the committee figure out some stuff and come up with recommendations. Staff certainly can recommend or not. Maybe more personal notification is in here, maybe not. I really wasn't trying to go there. I was trying to do some of this other stuff because when you have the signs out, if you rent, you're not going to get that notice, but you may have an opinion because you live there. So I'm really more for signage than I am for the personal, the postal service that takes more money. Of course, the signs will take some money too. So are y'all good with that, sending notification, adding notification options to the existing committee? Is everybody's doing yes? Are we good enough, Mr. Gary, on that one?
Yes, Mayor, that'll work.
Okay.
If you've got that direction, staff has direction to look into that with the committee.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I think that's all I have in concrete. On the alcohol permits, I am, I'm sorry, Ms. Hernandez, I'm not in agreement with the changes as you proposed, because I still think that if you've got a different person running the bar, there's some reasons why it's time for a conversation with that person regarding conditional use permits. Those of us that have been on P and Z know how important that is. But you made some very good points. If somebody's changing their name, because it's the same person, they changed their name, I'm fine with y'all going, yes, that's fine. You made a point about some of the hotels. They're out here and there's not, residential nearby, and that's pretty well contained, the noise. I'm good with that. So I'm good if some of these specific examples come back that we can have administrative approval in these particular cases. I would entertain those. But at this point, I'm not ready to go back to putting any in there. I just don't want to take away that opportunity of our citizens, because we know our police are not able to go out and make those reports at times. Probably when the noise is loud is when they've got other things they need to do. So we're going to have some that there's not going to have any, I'm going to call it demerits on them, but yet there are issues. I just can't take that right away from the public. So are y'all good if we let Ms. Hernandez work on those? And if there's anything else you need from me, I'd be happy to discuss that. Are
Yes,
y'all
sir.
okay with seeing how we can get some of those administratively approved, but not wholesale? Y'all good?
But in terms of
We're good?
the approval tonight,
Can I
would
ask
it
for
be?
clarification? Yeah, okay.
And 1 and 3 are gone for now, because that's a change we left last time. But I'm willing to make an amendment to bring some of it back with specifics.
And would you want that to go to the established conditional use permit committee as a separate aside process? We can approve this minus 1 and 3 and let that live in the code for a while we take time to go through that in more detail. It's a P and Z and council committee, and they have a couple of other things on their list as well.
I don't remember who's on there.
I can tell you in just a moment.
Yeah, I could look it up, and I forgot we had a committee on that.
Yes, and it was appointed initially to talk about the
Oh.
specific noise condition. We were
That's
going
the-
to put together that matrix for
That's
that
that
committee.
last group, yeah, okay.
Yes, and it is council members Mendoza, Garza, Prather, and from Planning and Zoning Commission, Kelsey and Meeks. It looks like we might need to replace Councilmember Mendoza, who was on P and Z at the time that was appointed, which would have been probably October of '22. So we can get that position filled. But great news, our planning division is pretty much fully staffed, so I have someone working to get those meetings going and on the calendar.
Okay. Do you still want to be on that one?
I'm fine with this, but I'm hearing you're uncomfortable with it. So, yeah, I'll serve on the committee and I'll.
No, I'm not
do it.
uncomfortable with being on the committee. You
Oh,
just
no,
said
no,
you
no.
had a lot
I'm
of time.
comfortable with,
things. With what's up here?
this suggestion, right?
Yeah. But that's not on the table to vote on unless one of you makes that amendment.
I'm not about to do all that. Yeah, I'll serve on the committee because we've
Okay.
never met, like,
Right.
so.
Okay. All right. Y'all still good with that? Okay. Do we need a motion to do that, to send this to a committee?
I'm kind of okay with the direction on that, but what I'm more concerned about is anything that's different than the present text that's up for approval. If you want any portion of that not considered, then that we do need a motion.
Okay. I'm not making a motion to bring 1 or 3 or the new 4 back. So right now it
Hayden,
stands
can
where
you
1 and
back up
3
one slide?
are gone.
Right, so that's, I just want to make sure
This is,
everybody
this is
understood
staff's
that.
suggestion, but this is not,
Right.
unless somebody makes an amendment to consider these, it's my thought that those are not on the table.
Okay, and I just want to make sure that was clarified so everybody understands, and
Okay.
as long as they understand what's being voted on.
And that was part of the motion from last meeting, which I had Hayden pull up on the screen, was the approval 6-1.
Right.
removing 1 and 3 from section 2837A.
Correct.
So that would stay as approved
Right,
previously.
but they
Okay.
may come back in some form or fashion.
Yes, ma'am.
As you.
Then we're,
brought up.
we're
Okay.
good with status quo then, if that's.
Okay. Everybody know where we are? Okay. Does anybody else have anything? I know, I don't have anything else for joy. So at this point, I'm gonna make a motion to postpone this entire item 9 to I need to provide a date certain, and I'm gonna need Ms. Hernandez's help to figure out what a reasonable date might be. I'm thinking second meeting in November?
Yes, Mayor, and I just want to real quick go through my notes, because I want to make sure that I'm certain what I'm supposed to be doing in the time between now and then. I have that there's going to be a committee on occupancy restrictions. That we're going to send the notification and the CUP items to those committees. Did you want that to happen also before this comes back?
I was hoping to get it all done. One more time, knock out these, I think there's 3 items, and then it's done, and you have a whole new one, but we're not nickel and diamond as we go through. Because I know y'all don't want the LDC of the month, and understand why, and I totally support that.
So the notification committee and the conditional use permit committee, I don't think we were expecting to have something complete and ready till November. which
And
puts-
notification.
Notification and CUP. Those two, I have a staff member going back and looking at the videos, working on the packet. Those are the two that I think will take a while. The occupancy restriction committee could potentially move a little bit quicker because we're only talking about.
You tell me what
homestead.
date.
Okay, if we want all 3 to meet, I hate to say, but probably December. Just thinking about the timeline that we had started thinking about for the CUP committee specifically. And then assuming they could get through this particular topic in one meeting. We have meetings December 5th and 19th. Maybe we aim for the 5th and see what happens.
Mr. Gary, do these need to go to P and Z? You were asking about that earlier. Are these substantive enough?
Well, there's a couple of ways to do that is if council has a consensus on an amendment they want to approve and it's significantly different than anything P and Z,
We would
you
need
could
to look
send it
at it
back.
and then send it to them.
But alternatively, you could have the direction to have it go directly from the committees to the P and Z, but then you'd have to, and then have it come back up
Then
to
we
the
won't know
council.
if that's really what we're looking for.
That's correct.
Well, that's why I asked, is this substantive enough that it needs to go back to P and Z?
It's gonna, actually,
Notifications is a new thought.
it's gonna be a function of what comes back, I think. And
So it needs to come back to here?
I think that's what I'm
And then
hearing
P and
is,
Z?
I think
And
that's
then
what I'm
them.
hearing. Y'all wanna see what the changes are, and then if it's substantive enough, you would direct it to be reviewed by the P and Z. That's what's historically been done. But again, it depends. If it's an item of, you're going from 2 to 3, for example, no, we're not saying that to P and Z. They made a recommendation, you're going with something else. It's really a question of what the substantive change is. We can look at it at that time.
Which we won't know until
That's
the
correct.
committees have done their
So it doesn't
report.
necessarily have to go to P and Z, it just depends
Okay.
what comes back.
So maybe, but it's got to come back to us first. And you're thinking the first meeting in December? Whatever date that is.
Yes, December 5th, and that would put us in 2024 if we have to go back to Planning Commission, because we would have to hold another public hearing.
Okay. May I make the motion to postpone to the December 5th meeting or sooner if staff is ready? I'd like to allow you to come back sooner. I don't want to demand that you come back sooner. May I do that?
You may.
Okay, so my motion is to postpone to the December 5th meeting for it to come back to us, but yet sooner if the committees get done sooner. And Ms. Hernandez feels like we're not pressuring her, but it can conveniently for staff come back sooner. I'm looking for a second. Okay, second by Mr. Mendoza. Discussion? Let's vote.
7-0.
All right. And I believe that concludes item 9. Am I correct? Ms. Hernandez,
Yes.
thank you for your patience. Okay, on to item 10, Ms. Trevino.
Okay. Consider approval of ordinance 2023-74 on the first of 2 readings, approving the 2023 annual service plan update for the Whisper Public Improvement District, authorizing city manager or designee to execute said document on behalf of the city and declare an effective date.
Okay, looking for a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion from Mr. Gleason. Is there a second? Second from Mr. Mendoza. Ms. Reyes, is this something that we need input from the staff, or is Mr. Locke here in case we have questions?
For questions.
Okay. Council, do y'all have any questions? If not, Mr. Trevino, let's vote.
Okay, the motion passes 7-0.
All right, and we'll repeat this on item 11.
Consider approval of ordinance 2023-75 on the first of 2 readings, approving the 2023 annual service plan update for the Whisper South Public Improvement District, authorizing city manager or designee to execute said document on behalf of the city and declare an effective date.
Motion to approve.
Motion from Mr. Gleason, seconded by Mr. Scott. Questions? Let's vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
All right, and item 12.
Consider approval of ordinance 2023-76 on the first of 2 readings, approving the 2023 annual service plan update for the Trace Public Improvement District, authorize city manager or designee to execute said document on behalf of the city and declare an effective date.
Motion to approve.
Motion by Mr. Scott, if you want a second, I need your microphone on, because I've been watching some of these meetings, and y'all don't always turn your microphone on.
You got good eyes, see all the way over here.
Second it?
Second.
No, I couldn't. I could barely hear you, it's a problem. Questions? Mr. Locke, anyone? Mr. Trevino, let's vote.
Excuse me. The motion passes 7-0.
Okay, and Mr. Locke, thank you for hanging out with us for a while in case we had questions. We appreciate it. Ms. Trevino, item 13.
Okay, consider approval of ordinance 2023-77 on the first of 2 readings, amending Chapter 19 of the San Marcos City Code regarding special events for the purposes of creating more ease in the application process, establishing a one-stop shop for customers and improving safety, equity, and coordination of events, providing a savings clause, providing for the repeal of any conflicting provisions, and providing an effective date.
Motion to approve.
Second. Oh, God, Mr. Scott, and I'm going to give the second to Ms. Garza this time.
And staff is available if you have questions. You just had a work session on it, so
And nothing has changed?
nothing has changed.
All right.
It's based on the direction you provided.
Questions?
No, I think it was a very well thought out.
I commend everyone. This is going to be so good for the public, so thank you very much. Thank you all. Mr. Trevino, let's use our little fancy voting machines again.
The motion passes 7-0.
Thanks for staying up with us. Item 14.
Excuse me. Consider approval of ordinance 2023-78 on the first of 2 readings, amending section 2.172 of the San Marcos City Code to change the membership requirements for service on the Parking Advisory Board, including procedural provisions, and provide an effective date.
I'm looking for a motion. I'll make the motion. Is there a second? Is that Mr. Scott?
Mm-hmm.
Good, thank you. Do y'all have any questions? We talked about this when it was on for discussion, and y'all saw what the change that we were looking to make. Any questions, concerns? This will be an improvement. Mr. Trevino, let's vote. Mr. Binion, thank you for staying up with us.
Okay, the motion passes 7-0.
All right, moving on, item 15.
Consider approval of resolution 2023-159R approving change order number 2 for the contract with Santa Clara Construction Ltd. for the Blanco Gardens Drainage Improvements Project in the amount of $1,964,712.71 for storm drain and river outfall construction, authorizing city manager or her designee to execute the appropriate documents relating to the change order on behalf of the city and declare an effective date.
Motion to approve.
A motion from Mr. Scott, seconded by Mr. Mendoza. Questions? Mr. Condor is here if we have any questions. I asked my questions on the message board, and I liked all the answers, so thank you. Mr. Trevino, will vote.
The motion passes 7-0.
And this is a wonderful thing for our community. Thank you, Mr. Condor. Item 16.
Consider approval of resolution 2023-160R, providing nomination to serve on the Hayes Central Appraisal District Board of Directors for one-year term commencing on January the 1st, 2024, and declare an effective date.
Council, there's a few changes that the legislature imposed, and there's an attachment to this one. But what we're looking for today is a nomination to serve on the Central Appraisal District Board of Directors. This time it's for a one-year term. They're going to end up staggering the terms. It's been, everybody gets appointed at the same time.
I'll do it.
And I'm on it now, and I was going to offer to continue.
Oh, you want to continue? Okay.
I will.
I thought you were trying to get off.
Nope. No, I'm willing if y'all are willing.
I'll make a motion to nominate the mayor to serve on this board.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Mendoza. And I thank you very much. And as I have, no,
Vote.
don't have to do that this time. Okay.
Mayor, I have a question.
Vote.
Yes, sir.
What actually do y'all talk about when you got to do that?
What the appraisal district board does, and that's what I was sort of explaining a couple of meetings ago. This is the board that approves the budget, policies. We hear from the chief appraiser when they talk about, there's a map review, and I forget what map looks at, but it's like an audit of the processes. There's also I don't know if I should call it an audit. There's a review by the comptroller that does this for school districts to make sure that the properties are not undervalued. And we pass that every year for our school district. So that says our appraisers are doing what they're supposed to be doing. That's all we do. We do not look at appraisals. We do not appoint the review board. A judge appoints the review board. Yeah, that was a change a couple of legislative sessions back. So we're just, and we hire the chief appraiser. And then the chief appraiser hires and does what they need to with their staff. So we're at the policy and budget approval.
Just a lot of people don't know exactly
Yeah.
what's involved.
Yeah. Well, they do tell us how many properties there are. And if you think about it, if somebody's got a 100-acre ranch, that's one account they have to deal with. And when that gets busted up into however many hundred homes, that's now 400 accounts for them instead of one.
Wow.
And that keeps happening and keeps happening. We're well over 100,000 now. So, but they're doing some really cool stuff. There's a lot of things that can be done by software now. Some things get done by software and reviewed by a human, but that's faster than the human having to do it. There's all sorts of improvements that's going on with the appraisal district. So some cool stuff going on. They have really improved their website. They've got information about protests out there. And ours, if you go to our website and you type in protests, first thing you get is information, takes you back to the Hays County site or the Hays Appraisal District site, but the information is there if somebody wants to protest their appraisals.
Thank you, Mayor.
I guess we'll vote now. No, thank you.
The motion passes 7-0.
All right. Item 17, the one you've been waiting for all night.
Receive staff presentation, discuss a request in case number PSA-23-02, preferred scenario amendment, North Lindsay Student Housing, to amend the preferred scenario map from existing neighborhood to high intensity for approximately 1.13 acres of land, more or less, generally located southwest of the intersection between Lindsay Street and North Street.
Yeah, this is 17. Okay.
Amanda Hernandez, Director of Planning and Development
I
Services.
was trying to figure out, is there a public, no, it's not a public hearing. I'm trying to figure out what we're going to do. I'm just going to let you just handle this right now. Is that okay?
That sounds
Thank
fantastic.
you.
All right, we are here this evening for an informational presentation on a request to change our preferred scenario map. Informational presentations, they're just that. We are here to inform council, the public, the community, our commissions that we have received a request from an applicant. There's no action taken this evening. We have a long way to go before you see this for action. To summarize, the request is approximately 1.13 acres located at the intersection of Lindsay and North Streets, and is surrounded by residential uses and Texas State University campus. Next slide. Upon initial review of the request, staff noted that while this area is not within a historic district, there are structures that are considered high and medium historic priorities on the site. We have not received any permits to move or demolish these buildings. Next slide. The particular request being presented this evening is the preferred scenario map amendment, and it would be to extend the boundaries of that dark purple downtown high-intensity zone to cover these properties. As the request moves forward, it will be accompanied with a zoning change request to Character District 5 Downtown, CD5D. The applicant is also seeking approval of a conditional use permit for purpose-built student housing and alternative compliance to allow 7-story buildings for a larger area, which includes properties east of North Street, and we will look at that in a moment. And City Council is the final approving body for all of these applications, so you will be the final approver on these. Next slide. On the current preferred scenario, we are designated existing neighborhood. In order to request Character District 5 zoning, you have to request a preferred scenario amendment. That's why we're here today. Next slide. This request is occurring as we are adopting our new comprehensive plan, so we thought it was important to show City Council what the map looks like on that future plan. This property is designated neighborhood medium on the proposed map, and the classification was given to these properties because of the current multifamily zoning and use of the properties. So important note, this property is zoned, it's entitled. It can be redeveloped under the MF18 and MF12 zoning districts that it has, but again, because the applicant's requesting a higher zoning classification, they have to request the preferred scenario map. Hayden, can you skip 2 slides for me?
Hold on a
Yes,
sec.
sir.
Hold on. Do you have your?
Sorry, the 419 North Street, could that be like a restaurant?
As it exists today,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that our zoning districts allow mixed use in multifamily. It's very strict multifamily, which is why we stuck them in Chapter 9 as legacy districts, because we can do much better with
Our
our
new
zoning.
allows different things.
But those older historical homes on those sites couldn't be turned to like,
It would have to be something that's approved on the use table. So I can go look it up and find out exactly what uses are permitted in MF, but it's mostly multifamily.
Or they could request a rezoning.
They could request a different rezoning. Yes.
that's it, Mayor.
All right, 2 slides, Hayden, on the concept plan. The concept plan provided by the applicant, as I mentioned, shows the entire project. On the left, outlined in red dashed line, is the area considered for the preferred scenario amendment, as well as the zoning change. And the other parcels, this in addition to the other parcels, will be part of the request for student housing and the height alternative compliance. There are a handful of slides with maps that we can reference if we need to, but I'm going to ask Hayden to jump forward to the schedule. There have been some questions from the public that I just wanted to make part of my presentation about why is this application on tonight's agenda? Why was it on Planning Commission's agenda? And it's because the applicant requested. So property owners and applicants are allowed to make requests, and we have to bring them forward to City Council. They have to follow our processes outlined in the Development Code. And our preferred scenario map amendment process is one of the most lengthy and involved processes that we have. We don't have these informational meetings for anything else. We've already held an informational meeting with Planning and Zoning Commission. The applicant held the required neighborhood presentation. I'm here this evening with y'all, and we will be before Neighborhood Commission for an informational meeting. And there will not be any action taken until October 24th, when we have our first public hearing. We haven't reviewed the request at this time. We're just letting you know it's out there, but for the public hearing, we will have staff recommendations. And the notice for the public hearings will go out this week, so posted signs as well as those those personal notices that go in the mail to everyone within 400 feet. We have already sent the application notice. That's required early on in the process because of that, the neighborhood presentation meeting by the developer. So that went out a few weeks ago. And again, this process is a very lengthy and involved one. It has 2 public hearings at City Council. You will see this once, public hearing and no action, and then a second time, you will see it with the public hearing and take action. Staff will work to make sure that all of those other applications align, so the zoning change, CUP, and alternative compliance all require public hearings. We'll make sure that those public hearings align. That way you can take action one item after the other in the appropriate order. So we have to change the map, then the zoning, then the other things come afterwards. That is my summary. That is the information we have at this time. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, and there's no motion this evening, but are there any questions? Prather?
More concerns, the homes there on Lindsay and North Street, you know, like they have historical value, they really match the character, you know, and that's a really cool neighborhood. With Joe's Cafe, you know, the DZ house, the student, I mean, there's.
Presbyterian Church.
Yeah, it's just a really unique neighborhood. And can we go to the concept plan on, page 1? Keep going, not that one, the one that says concept, yeah, that one. Yeah, like, so I see 2 sites, so I'm glad something will go there. You know, those are existing apartments, and something vertical going there will add, you know, obviously property tax and more people in this walkable neighborhood. But it's that third site, the one that we're voting on, or not voting on, we're discussing.
It's what the PSA is about.
Yes.
Only the one in the red rim.
I just have, you know, concerns because that is more of a, you know, there's some existing homes with historical value. If there is some infill within it, you know, something that would kind of match the character, not, you know, your typical, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5-story type of apartment. But I'm glad that there's something going in, especially with the apartments. But that current site, I'm not gonna lie, I have some concerns.
Anyone else? I'll go next while y'all are still thinking. The part with the red rim, because I'm looking at the map that shows the stark contrast between existing neighborhood and the CD5. I watched the videos by a private citizen of at least parts of this meeting, and what I kept hearing was transition, and buffers, but transition. And what we have now with the Elms Apartments, 2-story, small scale, I think that's providing a nice actual transition between the 1-story, and I think the other 2-story single family, and this, and then going to the 5-story and the CD5. So my concern is 1-story, 5-story, right across the street from each other. So I don't know if it's appropriate for me to express concerns here, but that's something to go here, something maybe medium in the middle. And I think, is that kind of where you were going with that?
You know, that and just keeping those buildings, you know, they have historical value that really tie in that whole area of the town. And I wouldn't want to lose them. That's why I mentioned, I was like, could that be a restaurant? So there's another place to eat, like another Joe's Cafe, another place that's just another block away for people to walk to. You know, that's why I was asking if it could potentially be like a restaurant or something on those buildings, so we can not lose those really nice looking historical homes in that area.
Yeah, them are really, really nice. Others, concerns, thoughts? Ms. Garber? No, nothing at this point? Okay, and Mr. Meagle, could you bring up the document that I sent you a link to? The statement was made earlier that the university's grown by 30%. That's not accurate. And I'm just going to read, because I keep hearing, oh, the university's growing so much. That's really not accurate. I'm going to, if we could start, just go down the very bottom. The fall of 2023 has not been posted yet. There we go. If you'll just look there, let's just look at 2017, 38.6. Next year, 38.6. Next year, 38.1. The COVID year, 37.8. Second COVID year, 37.8, and then back to 38.1. So I don't know what it is this year, but I know that their freshman class is increasing, but freshmen live in dorms for the most part. So anyway, I just keep hearing that, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to take the opportunity to correct that because their total enrollment is not growing. And I'm just stating that as fact. So if we're through with this, yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to offer clarification that I looked at the land use matrix, and you cannot do a mix of uses. You would have to do multifamily or some sort of housing with the current zoning district.
Or ask for rezoning.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Moving on to item 18. Thank you.
Number 18. Okay. Hold discussion regarding the city council meeting procedures under Chapter 2 of the city code and provide direction to staff.
Okay. Council, we've had some questions. There's been some concerns by the public that we didn't have a lot of clarification on certain things with our rules. So Mr. Vino and I started looking at the list. We've talked about it with the city manager's office and with the city attorney. And we looked at it and said, you know, there's room for improvement here. And when I got to looking at it, I discovered these look like they have been patched and there was something in here that really didn't belong here, et cetera. So I've rearranged them into what I think makes sense. We had a couple of things in preparation of agenda that was preparation of agenda. And we didn't have anything on here about recommendation resolutions from boards and commissions because that's relatively new, or things that are coming from council committees. I would think that if something's coming from a council committee, there's at least 2 council members, if not 3. If they are in agreement, then it can come onto an agenda. So that was added. There was, I had concern about citizen comment, and we talked about a number of different changes in the phraseology of citizen comment. Community perspective, I don't remember who came up with that. It was not me, but it was very good.
I like it.
And so that's one of the substantive changes in here. Is citizen comment will become community engagement if y'all agree. This is for just discussion tonight, correct?
That's correct. Discussion, and if council is inclined to move forward with some amendments, then an actual ordinance would come forward at either the next meeting or a date you specify.
Yeah, we provided you detail because I'd already started working on it because I didn't know what to present if I didn't start working on it. So we're not voting on this evening, but we're giving opinions and anything else that you may have on this.
The mayor's really good at and punctual about these kind of things, and also is the chair of the meeting. So this looks great. Thank you for cleaning this up. Let's make a motion to approve it, or no?
We're just looking to see if we want to move it forward to come back, and it'll come back with this. Oh, one more thing that I've added is that you only get to speak once during a citizen comment period. Public hearing on this particular item, you get to speak again. But I know there's been a few times when someone who has time left wants to yield time, and we don't do that, wants to yield time to somebody who's already spoken. And so we just haven't allowed that, but we've got clarity that it's actually in our rules now. And the Q&A, we've also got some more clarity to that. So anyway, if y'all are good with this coming back as is, and of course, if you see something in it that you want changed, it'll come back on the next agenda, and we'll have an opportunity to amend at that point in time. Anything else? Kudos to, y'all good with community perspective? Kudos to whoever came up with that one.
What do you mean?
All right.
Maybe I was.
Moving on to item
And Mayor, just for clarity, I'm
sir.
assuming, do we want this at, and I should check with Stephanie, because as city manager, I don't know how the next agenda looks, if we want it the next agenda?
Ms. Reyes, we're talking to you.
Or is it too full? Would the next meeting be appropriate to come back, or is there
Can we
a
talk
better
about that at
date?
agenda setting to see if we, yeah.
So, I mean, if it can go on the next one, we'll put it on the next one. If it's too full, then as long as council's okay and
Yeah.
gives us the authority.
Okay,
Yeah.
some flexibility
We're
there.
good.
Okay, great.
All right, thank you. On to item 19.
Discuss and consider appointments to fill vacancies on the following boards and commissions and provide direction to staff. A, Library Board, B, Parks and Recreation Board.
Okay, folks, and you saw on the list that Mr. Trevino sent out that we had five folks interested in the library board, although some of them were more specific about library board, others were, I want to serve my community, and were less specific. Ms. Trevino, it's one each, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we will accept
I want-
nominations.
I want to confirm, is Catherine Cargill currently on the library board and up for reappointment?
She says she's on it, but that may be from before. I knew her name was
Probably
familiar.
before previously. I could look
Yeah.
into the system real quick.
So I'm always pretty open to reappointing people if they're already serving.
Well, if
I saw
she's-
that in her application, but I wasn't sure.
She couldn't be on it right now because she wouldn't be.
She wouldn't
But
be
it's still-
submitting her
oh, yeah,
But these
application.
applications were filled in January.
That's right.
Yeah, so she's probably not
So
on
she
it
may
right
have
now.
been on previously. and-
Correct.
Uh-huh. But she'd been on previously. We just, maybe she didn't turn in her application this year in time to be reappointed, or maybe maybe she's been on years past. I don't know.
I'll nominate Catherine Cargill.
Okay. Mr. Gleason, are there other nominations?
I was gonna do Charles Sears.
Okay. All right, well, as I've said before, I'm just thrilled that we've got people of different ages, different times in San Marcos, and people who say, I use the library.
I know, I love that.
Yeah. Okay, any other nominations? Okay, then what you will do is we will not be able to vote with our push buttons, and when Ms. Trevino calls your name, you will say either Cargill or Sears, please, as you choose.
Okay.
Cargill.
Thank you. And Mr. Scott?
Cargill.
Mr. Gleason?
Cargill.
Mayor Houston?
Cargill?
Ms. Garza?
Sears.
Mr. Gonzalez? And Mr. Mendoza?
Cargill.
So Ms. Catherine is appointed to the Library Board. Cargill.
Okay, and we have a vacancy on our Parks and Recreation Board.
Who left? Who was the person that left?
Oh my God, hold on. I have to switch my system
I'm sorry.
from the voting.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I don't know. But again, we've got people that, I use the parks, I'm in there, I take my kids, and then we have some others who are more serve the public, so,
I'll nominate Derek Griblin.
okay. The name of Derek Griblin has been put into play by Mr. Gleason. Is there a nomination by anyone else?
I have a nomination. I cannot pronounce their first name, but the last name is Perez.
Kennelin?
Yes,
or
ma'am.
Something like that, all right.
Mhm. I think with her background, she has so much enthusiasm and she's young.
Oh, but I'm thinking of another one I'd like to put her on.
Oh, for real? Okay.
Yeah, except we don't have a vacancy there right now.
Right, right. I don't know, just to include some diversity in the board. But yeah, I can't pronounce her first name. I don't want to butcher it.
Okay, but you're putting her name in.
Perez.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. We have a Perez who is a young person. Other nominations?
And Mayor, just if you don't mind repeating the first name for Ms. Pettis, if you are able to pronounce it, because I don't know.
Kinallyne.
Kinali.
Kinali? No.
I had Kenneland, but I
We'll
could
go
be
with that.
wrong.
Okay.
But, okay, so if, when Ms. Trevino calls your name, if you would say either Griblin or Pettis, and we'll go around the table.
Okay, Mr. Scott,
Griblin.
Mr. Gleason,
Griblin.
Mayor Houston,
Griblin,
Ms. Garza,
Perez.
Mr. Gonzalez. Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez, Mendoza, sorry.
Griblin, no worries, Griblin.
Griblin, thank you, and Mr. Prather.
Griblin.
All right, Mr. Griblin is appointed to the Parks and Rec.
okay.
I see them there all the time.
And that brings us to item 20.
They're regular.
The City Council will convene in executive session pursuant to the following section of Texas Government Code, A, Section 551.071, consultation with attorney to receive advice of legal counsel regarding pending litigation concerning the title to an alleyway located near the intersection of University Drive and CM Allen Parkway, in cause number 23-0339 in District Court of Hays County, 207th Judicial District Court. B, Section 551.071, consultation with attorney to receive advice of legal counsel regarding pending litigation regarding Eric Cervini et al. Versus Chase Stapp, Brendan Wickenwetter, Matthew Danzer, and the City of San Marcos Civil Action Number 121, CV 00568-RP in the United States District Court, Western District of Texas, Austin Division.
And as always, we have this posted on our 3 o'clock agenda, and we've completed our discussion at that time, so we do not need to go into executive session right now or during this regular meeting. So we're ready for item 21.
Okay, consider action by motion or provide direction to staff regarding the following executive session items held during the work session and/or regular meeting pursuant to the following sections of the Texas Government Code, just as read above.
Okay, on item A, we provided direction to staff, and item B was postponed. So that brings us to question and answer session with press and public related to items on this agenda. We have Mr. Billy Ray Callahan, who is in chambers with us, and he will be followed by Ms. Capoletta, who will join us online. And after that, I'll be looking for a motion to adjourn. I know. It's your turn, Mr. Callahan.
Yes. I gave you some packets earlier today.
We have them.
These packages that I gave out to you is in regards to the integrity of the Dunbar neighborhood, because as you notice, the building for restoration, those buildings needs to be restored because it's just making Dunbar an ugly sight. And all the buildings that I have mentioned, they really need to be restored. And then that way, when January comes around, I'm hoping that this will be on the agenda because they really need to be restored. Those buildings can't stay in that condition indefinitely. And what I'm concerned about is Allison Brake, the historical preservation officer, because I remember back in the day, I received a letter saying that my house is scheduled to be demolished because of neglect. And then if you notice, the home economic building is also very, very, the building is very unattractive compared to the adjacent building of the Dunbar Recreation Center. And I need both those structures, all the structures that I have listed here to be restored. And then that way, when January comes around, this will be in the process of being restored or having some kind of funding so that these buildings can really be restored, because they can't stay like that indefinitely. It's, you know, they need, I mean, we need the funding in order to get those buildings restored. And also, I have a second page. This guy's named Kurt, and he owns the First Baptist Church. I don't know what the problem with that First Baptist Church, because it is not only an eyesore, it's becoming hazardous to the people around that structure.
Mr. Callahan, your time is up. I'm going to ask staff if y'all can provide written response regarding each of these, if it's been in the budget, if there's an application process, exactly what these are. Is that okay? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Callahan. And next is Ms. Capoletta. Looking to see if she's on. There she is. Okay.
1822 Belvin. My question's related to Mr. Callahan. It relates to the code agenda item you had, and I'm just shocked that there's no demo by neglect for that church that he references. And I've been to Mr. Callahan's house, and there is no way in any orbit that that house needs to be demolished. I feel like this is targeting Mr. Callahan, and I feel it's racist. As far as the push, that's my first question is where, how can you guys even say you're gonna hold up to land development code and you're letting that monstrosity, because a rich white person owns it, and you guys are coming after Mr. Callahan? My second question is the push buttons are not available for live viewing on TV. Maybe it's because I'm on Zoom, but I'm gonna go back and fact check it. And so if the push button score is not not visible to the public, are you guys gonna fix it? The third question is during citizen comments and public hearings, and this portion, the screen that's more visible for the public is that timer. Do city staff who are using words like community perspective really think the timer is more important? I'm sorry. It was when Amanda, and you know, I love Amanda to death and Andrea, but I'm really upset with them right now. But I will give Amanda credit. When she runs those P&Z meetings, at least there's an equal amount of spacing when it comes to the boxes. And so I'm not sure why you can't fix them. As far as your suggestion of community perspective, I think that provides a lot of semantic noise. If anything, it should be community perspective speeches, but this would eliminate developers from the community. So my question is, I mean, I believe it takes away the value, right? It makes it a softer perspective as opposed to my comment, which is authoritative. And my question for city staff is if they reached out to people like me who've given the most amount of community perspective speeches in the history of this community, or more importantly, the neighborhood commission, or is this just city staff trying to use optics like, haha, we care about community perspective, when now it's going to create semantic noise? And I'm wondering if they reached out to the neighborhood commission. Additionally, I'm wondering if the attendees of the airport meeting, why that's not in the packet and why those comments are not in the packet. That's another question that I have. I noticed that you guys, notification options. I've got a question. I feel that we need both signage and letter notification. And are you guys going to consider that the radius be expanded to be congruent with the proximity of the development, right? And the smart terminal situation that Annie and Noah keep bringing up, if it's going to be a large monstrosity, will you consider not only giving notification via letter, but also signage? Finally, I would ask for you guys on item number 17, also with your land development code, to make sure the application notice goes with the meeting. And will you consider making that change to the LDC process so the developer application notice goes out with the meeting and you have appropriate signage? Thank you for your time, and God bless San Marcos.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
I will accept a motion to adjourn. Did I hear one? Is your microphone on?
It is.
That was Mr. I hear a male voice this way, and I'm not always sure which one of you it is.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, motion by Mr. Scott. Is there a second?
Oh, I just want to clarify, somebody's going to respond to Professor Capoletta, yeah? Because she asked questions.
She had mostly statements. There were a few questions, and I'm presuming that staff will look at those and see what,
As far as
what we have answers for.
As far as the Zoom, my understanding from Ms. Surley is that it has all been broadcast. It's there, that it looks like it's just a screen setting that needs to be set on the end user side.
Are you talking about the voting boxes?
Yes, ma'am.
I've been watching, is that screen what's going out on the
Yes, ma'am.
airwaves? I thought the voting boxes were in the lower right corner.
It's been showing from what Ms. Surley has said. As far
Yeah,
as
I'll look for it.
the timer, I know that's an issue that Ms. Capoletta has brought forward, and Ms. Surley has let her know that we can't because of the voting screen and the equipment that we have. So that's not a possibility within our current capabilities with our equipment.
Yeah.
So those are the questions.
Okay. All righty. And still looking for a second for the adjournment.
Second?
We gonna use pushy button?
Oh, yeah, let me start it. There it goes.
I like it.
Ms.
Ms.
Garza?
Garza, do you want to go home?
There we go.
Sometimes you
7
gotta hit it a couple of times.
That's a 7 to
No, we
0.
don't. I do worry about your computer. All right, so 7 of us want to go home, so I'm going to say meeting adjourned at 9:41.